Chapter 2075. Yao Xiong putting away Lu Wuqi's ring, Zhuan left the place. The resources in Lu Wuqi's ring were abundant. Zhuan had put most of them into the heavenly armor star in Devour's body. In addition, Zhuan also found a key with the words God Lu engraved on the handle. Zhuan's eyes lit up. He knew that this was the key to activating God Lu. After all, Lu Wuqi was the captain of God Lu. In the land of the far west, this kind of special airship was very necessary. You could either take someone else's airship or have your own airship. Zhuan was worried about not having a flying ship, and it was very inconvenient to take someone else's flying ship. He needed to buy a ticket to reach the designated location. Now that he had the Lu God, it was much more convenient for Zhuan. He could go wherever he wanted. Pa pa pa. Suddenly, applause sounded from not far away. Zhuan stopped and looked coldly at the source of the sound. On the left, a young man in a golden brocade robe was clapping his hands while sizing up Zhuan, as if he wanted to see through Zhuan completely. Zhuan calmly looked at the young man, but a trace of fear arose in his heart because he actually didn't notice how this person appeared here. Now Zhuan's soul was extremely powerful, but this person was able to come to this place without him noticing. It was obvious that this person was not ordinary. He probably had an extremely powerful concealment technique. Real God Extreme Thunder's doppelganger. His original body was able to kill a cultivator of Void Sky Stage 5 with just 3 steps of Void Sky Stage. His doppelganger even borrowed the power of 10 fires to kill a cultivator of Void Sky Stage 6 like Lu Wuqi. "You are truly not simple," the young man said with a smile. Zhuan said calmly, "Who are you? How long have you been here?" The young man smiled faintly and said, "I am Yao Xiong, and I am only a rogue cultivator. I just happened to pass by here and encountered such a genius like you. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave." Zhuan became more and more afraid of the young man in front of him because he found that this person's aura was faintly discernible. He actually couldn't sense this person's cultivation base. Yao Xiong smiled faintly and quietly blocked Zhuan's path. Zhuan's eyes revealed murderous intent and said, "What do you mean by this?" Yao Xiong laughed and said, "Brother, your murderous aura is a bit heavy. Be a bit more amiable. Is precious. I just want to discuss something." Zhuan slowly retracted his killing intent. His face was still cold as he asked, "What is it?" Yao Xiong looked around and set up a concealment array formation. Zhuan's heart stirred. Looking at this person's words was a very one. "Is this matter?" "Brother," he said. Yao didn't answer. "Zhuan," Zhuan said. He, "Brother Zhua, I think you should be very interested in this item." Yao Xiong mysteriously took out a scroll and handed it to Zhuan. Zhuan took the scroll doubtfully and opened it to take a look. His pupils could not help but shrink into needles. Inside the scroll was a fragmented map, which recorded the topographic map of a certain place. However, Zhuan was extremely familiar with this topographic map because it was the topographic map of the waxing and waning phases. The reason why Zhuan was surprised was naturally because this incomplete map was a map of the yin, yang, waning paths, and most importantly, this map was partially compatible with the Jade Scroll left behind by the Purple Star Lord that he had obtained from the Crepe Myrtle sect. In the Jade Scroll that Zhuan obtained from the Crepe Myrtle sect that recorded the sun and moon grass, there was a fragmented map, and it was a fragmented map of the sun and moon grass. Now the fragmented map that Yao Xiong took out faintly showed signs of compatibility with the fragmented map in the Crepe Myrtle sect's Jade Scroll. This showed that the two were closely related, and it was possible that the two fragmented maps were fragments of the same map. After calming down, Zhuan pretended to be disappointed. "A detailed map of the yin, yang, waning paths? Unfortunately, it's just a fragmented map." Yao Xiong was not surprised by Zhuan's surprise, because every cultivator who saw this fragmented map for the first time would feel ecstatic and unable to control themselves. Although the yin, yang, waning paths were in the Myriad Magnet Sea, it was an extremely famous dangerous place in the Great Brahma domain, where even void sky cultivators could easily fall. If one recklessly entered the yin, yang, waning paths, it was very easy to fall. But if you grasp the correct route of the yin, yang, waning and waning paths, then for the cultivators who entered the yin, yang, waning and waning paths to search for treasures, it was absolutely more important than their life. No wonder Yao Xiong looked around and set up a shielding formation before taking out the fragmented map. If this fragmented map were to spread, it would definitely cause many cultivators to fight over it like crazy. After all, Nguyen had seen many markings on this fragmented map. Most of these markings were dangerous areas, but one of them caught Zhuowen's attention. This marking had the words, Luo God Palace Ruins, written on it. Brother Yao, what kind of place is this Luo God Palace Ruins? Zhuowen asked in surprise. Yao Xiong looked at Zhuowen in surprise and said, Brother Zhuo, don't you know about the Luo God Palace Ruins? Cultivators in the Myriad Magnet Sea should know about this place, right? Zhuowen smiled faintly and said, I've been cultivating in seclusion most of the time and rarely come out. I really don't know about the Luo God Palace Ruins. Yao Xiong took a deep look at Zhuowen but didn't expose Zhuowen's lie. Instead, he explained patiently, the Luo God Palace is extremely famous in the far west. It was a powerful force 1,000,000 years ago. After Yao Xiong's patient explanation, Zhuowen finally understood the ins and outs of the Luo God Palace. At the same time, he also knew why he hadn't heard of the Luo God Palace in other places. It had a lot to do with the Great Brahma Sky region. 1,000,000 years ago, a proud woman had appeared in the far west of the Great Brahma Sky region. This woman had advanced to the Void Sky realm in a short 100 years. Her talent was almost heaven-defying. In 1,000 years, this woman had advanced to the 8 steps Void Sky region, shocking the entire Great Brahma Sky region. In that era, this woman was the most dazzling star. She was a household name, and even many cultivators from neighboring heavens knew her name. This woman's name was Luoshan, and she was the ancestor of the Luo God Palace. After Luoshan's cultivation reached the 8 steps Void Sky region, she unified countless forces in the far west region and established the Luo God Palace. In that era, apart from the 10 major sects and the Great Brahma Sky Palace, the Luo God Palace's reputation was the best. It was almost on par with the 10 major sects of the star field. Luoshan loved to fight. After establishing the Luo God Palace, she challenged the patriarchs of the 10 major sects of the star field, shocking the entire star field. The patriarchs of the 10 major sects were furious and wanted to teach Luoshan a lesson. However, in the end, Luoshan defeated the patriarchs of the 10 major sects one by one. After the challenge, Luoshan fell into an epiphany and understood life and death, breaking through to the 9 steps Void Sky region. After Luoshan broke through to the 9 steps Void Sky region, the Great Brahma of the Great Brahma Sky Palace appeared and personally summoned Luoshan. No one knew what Great Brahma said when he summoned Luoshan. Everyone only knew that Luoshan had mixed feelings after leaving the Great Brahma Sky Palace. As Luoshan had understood life and death, she was invincible in the entire Great Brahma Sky region except for Great Brahma. Therefore, the Luo God Palace developed faster and faster, almost surpassing the 10 major sects and approaching the Great Brahma Sky Palace. With the Luo God Palace's power back then, it was enough to enter the star field and become the leader of the 10 major sects. However, for some reason, the Luo God Palace remained in the far west region even though it was already so powerful. Luoshan rarely showed herself and was basically in seclusion. Suddenly, one day, an extremely resentful voice came from the Luo God Palace. The owner of the voice was Luoshan. It was also on that day that Great Brahma came to the far west region and destroyed the Luo God Palace with a flip of his hand. Luoshan also appeared from her seclusion. However, she was extremely weak at that time. She was listless and her face was pale. Moreover, her beautiful eyes were blind at that time. Great Brahma and Luoshan fought for 10 days and 10 nights, shattering countless galaxies in the far west region and shattering the starry sky into countless fragments. In the end, Great Brahma severely injured Luoshan. However, before Luoshan died, she sacrificed her life to move the Luo God Palace ruins to the deepest part of the Waning Peaks. Furthermore, Luotian used her lifetime of cultivation to mess up the starry sky rules in the far west region and cast the most vicious curse on the great Brahma sky. The main reason why such a terrifying magnetic field appeared in the far west region was inseparable from Luotian back then. Such a powerful magnetic field was to restrain great Brahma. Although the far west region didn't dare to confirm it, there were already rumors that the terrifying magnetic field was great Brahma's weakness. Otherwise, after the battle, great Brahma no longer came to find the Luo god palace in the waning peaks. Instead, he ignored the far west region. It was probably because of this magnetic field. And this magnetic field was Luotian's curse on great Brahma. She cursed great Brahma to not be able to step into the pure land that Luotian had created. It was also from then on that the entire great Brahma domain, except for the far west region, almost all the other regions were forbidden from mentioning Luotian's name. Over time, with the exception of the far west, the cultivators in the other regions gradually forgot about Luotian. This was also why Zhuowen had never heard of such a famous master in the great Brahma domain's star field. What did Luotian say back then? Zhuowen looked at Yao Xiong and asked curiously. Chapter 2076. Lady Ghost Curse. Your map of the waning lunar crescent is incomplete. Most importantly, the location of the Luotian palace is incomplete. Zhuowen said after a moment of silence. Although Zhuowen appeared calm on the surface, his heart was beating wildly. He was certain that the map fragment he had obtained from the Crate Myrtle sect was the other half of the map fragment that Yao Xiong had. Furthermore, the terrain listed on the other half of the map fragment was the exact location of the Luotian Palace ruins. In the beginning, Yuan had never come into contact with the waning lunar crescent. He had never even been there, so he did not know where the sun and moon grass was located on the map he had obtained. Now that Yao Xiong's map fragment had a location marked in advance, he immediately compared it with the map fragment that he had. He knew that the map fragment clearly recorded the various locations of the Luotian Palace ruins. If he could reach the Luotian Palace ruins, he would be able to move around the Luotian Palace ruins like a fish in water with the map fragment he had. Not only would he be able to obtain the sun and moon grass, but he would also be able to obtain other good things from the Luotian Palace ruins. However, Yao Xiong did not mind and said, "Brother Zhua, you're wrong. It's enough to find the Luotian Palace ruins. As long as we can find the Luotian Palace ruins, with our strength, what do we have to be afraid of? Furthermore, I see that Brother Zhua's array formation skills are extremely impressive. You will be of great use in this trip to the Luotian Palace." Zhuowen sneered in his heart. It seemed that Yao Xiong had been here for a long time. He had even seen the trap and kill array that he had set up. However, he did not say anything. Since it was on the way to the waning lunar crescent, even if Yao Xiong did not have any good intentions, Zhuowen had to go because of the map fragment in Yao Xiong's hands. Without the map fragment, it would be too difficult for Zhuowen to find the Luotian Palace ruins in the waning lunar crescent. However, once he found it, he would be like a fish in water. "I'll think about it," Zhuowen said in a low voice. Yao Xiong, however, was in no hurry. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back and smiled at Zhuowen. Although Zhuowen had already made up his mind, he didn't immediately agree. After all, if he agreed too readily, it would instead arouse Yao Xiong's suspicions. Not long after, Zhuowen gritted his teeth and said, "Although the waxing, waning and waning phases are very dangerous, riches and honor come from danger. I promise, Brother Yao." Yao Xiong laughed heartily and said, "Brother Zhua is indeed a straightforward person. The fact that you agreed so quickly is out of my expectations. However, you are right. Wealth comes from danger. If one is a coward, how can one walk far on the path of martial arts?" "When are we leaving?" Zhuowen asked. 3 days later, I still need to invite a few old friends. When the time comes, we'll gather here, Yao Xiong said. Zhuowen frowned slightly. He didn't expect Yao Xiong to invite others. As if seeing the expression on Zhuowen's face, Yao Xiong smiled and said, "Brother Zhua may not know this, but the waxing, waning and waning phases are extremely dangerous. Even Void Sky 8th step cultivators may die if they aren't careful. The more people there are, the safer it will be." Zhuowen nodded non-committally and didn't continue to speak. However, in order to keep this a secret, Brother Zhua, it's best if you keep this thing on you. This way, this Yao can ensure that you won't break your promise and leave Dubhe City. Yao Xiong smiled and handed a black bracelet to Zhuan, his eyes full of deep meaning. Zhuowen took the black bracelet. Even if he did not use his spiritual consciousness to search it, he knew that Yao Xiong's spiritual consciousness brand must have been left behind in it. It should be used to confirm Zhuo Wen's location. Then, this Zhuo will take his leave first. After saying that, Yuan leaped and left this place. After returning to Dubhe City, Yuan first went to the dock. After putting the god Lu into the spirit ring, he returned to the flourishing building. Brother Zhua, are you really planning to go to the waxing and waning phases? Inside the room, Ren Yangon suddenly stood up and exclaimed. Although Zhuan was powerful, going inside still pointed to disaster. I came to the Great Brahma domain for the waxing and waning phases. You don't need to say anything more. Also, don't follow me in. If possible, cut off all ties with me. Otherwise, staying in the Great Brahma domain won't do you any good. After saying that, Yuan left the flourishing building. However, before leaving, he left a lot of resources for the four of them. Why is he going to the waxing and waning phases? That place is filled with adventurers from all over the Tian domain, or some old fellows who have no hope of breaking through and enter to find opportunities. Yuan is so young and has such great talent. Why does he want to enter the waxing and waning phases? Yin Bingyun asked in confusion. Yun Chuyu's beautiful eyes were filled with complicated emotions as she said, because Brother Zhua's wife needs the sun and moon grass to save her life. That's why he wants to enter the waxing and waning phases at all costs. For a moment, the room fell into a long silence. 3 days later, in the wilderness of Dubhe City, a stream of light quickly flew over. Above a canyon, a figure wearing clothes whiter than snow appeared. It was Zhuan. Zhuowen's gaze swept over and landed on two people who had been waiting for a long time. One of the two people was wearing a golden brocade robe. It was Yao Xiong, the person who invited Zhuowen to enter the waxing and waning phases 3 days ago. Standing beside Yao Xiong was an old woman with a face as pale as snow. This old woman had a head of white hair that draped over her face. Her face was blurry, but one could vaguely see that hidden in her white hair was a ferocious, ghost-like face. After Zhuan arrived, this old woman glared at Yuan coldly with her ferocious eyes. It sent chills down one's spine. Zhuan only glanced at the old woman before his gaze landed on Yao Xiong. Yao Xiong, is everyone here? Yao Xiong chuckled. Not yet. There are still 2 people on the way. They should be here soon. Let me introduce this person first. Hee, this old woman is the Ghost Curse Lady. I heard from Yao Xiong that although your cultivation level is very low, your strength is not bad, and your array skills are not weak either. I wonder if Yao Xiong was lying? The old woman laughed and interrupted Yao Xiong's words. She stretched out her skinny right hand and gently pinched her thumb and middle finger together. Suddenly, ripples appeared in the surrounding space. Zhuowen's body trembled. He found that countless orchids were protecting him. These orchids were very strange. They kept squirming, and at the stamens, mouths full of sharp teeth grew out and bit at Zhuan. Zhuowen snorted coldly. His terrifying divine sense gushed out and turned into countless large hands, violently crushing these orchids. Then the orchids around him disappeared. Hee, not bad, not bad. You can actually break this old woman's illusion. You are qualified to join our team. The Ghost Curse Lady smiled coldly and withdrew her skinny right hand. Her eyes were full of arrogance, as if it was Zhuowen's honor that she had attacked Zhuowen just now. Courtesy demands reciprocity. Old woman, since you attacked me, I can't be rude. As he spoke, the more than 300 divine soul galaxies in Zhuowen's spiritual space operated at the same time. Then, a vast and terrifying divine sense condensed into a sharp golden light and quickly swept toward the Ghost Curse Lady. Calling me an old woman? You are courting death. The Ghost Curse Lady jumped up like a cat whose tail was pinched. At the same time, she released her divine sense, condensed it into a point, and blasted it toward Zhuan. Unfortunately, the Ghost Curse Lady's divine sense light was shattered in an instant, and Zhuowen's divine sense light was unstoppable. It slammed heavily into the Ghost Curse Lady's forehead. The Ghost Curse Lady spat out a mouthful of blood. Her pale face became even paler and bloodless. Zhuowen's divine sense blasted into her divine soul, instantly severely injuring her divine soul, causing her to have a splitting headache. The Ghost Curse Lady stared at Zhuon with lingering fear. She did not expect this kid's spiritual soul to be so terrifying that it was even stronger than hers. Although the Ghost Curse Lady's cultivation was only at the 4th step of the virtual sky realm, she was a level 7 divine array master. Her spiritual soul was naturally not weak. However, Zhuon was a freak. Due to the star's meditation diagram that Devour cultivated, his spiritual soul was much stronger than that of ordinary cultivators. The Ghost Curse Lady was at a disadvantage when fighting against Zhuon with her divine sense. Of course, with her cultivation, she was no match for Zhuon. That's enough. Both of you, stop arguing. Do me Yao Xiong a favor. Yao Xiong immediately stepped forward to mediate. The Ghost Curse Lady snorted coldly and did not make a fuss. She swallowed her grievances in silence. Zhuon smiled faintly. He did not care about the Ghost Curse Lady's attitude. You guys are so early. Suddenly, a thunderous voice came from the horizon, resounding through the sky and startling many birds. Zhuowen looked over and saw a tower-like man who was 2 meters tall. He was walking over at an extremely fast speed, and the ground was trembling along with him as if there was an earthquake. Chapter 2077. Emperor Spirit. The tower-like man took a step forward and arrived in front of Yao Xiong and the others. His giant height of 2 meters allowed him to look down on the 3 people present. We just arrived. Luo Suo, let me introduce you. This is my new guest, Brother Zhuowen. Yao Xiong smiled and immediately pointed to Zhuowen, who was standing to the side. The tower-like man glanced at Zhuowen indifferently and nodded without greeting him. Zhuowen could see the disdain in the tower-like man's eyes. Obviously, he was looking down on Zhuowen, who was only at the 3rd level of the virtual sky realm. Since Luo Suo had such an attitude, Zhuowen naturally wouldn't be so polite and took the initiative to greet him. The corners of Yao Xiong's mouth curled up slightly, but he tactfully shut his mouth. Yao Xiong knew Luo Suo's character best. He was a guy who wouldn't hide his emotions in his heart. If Luo Suo didn't like him, he definitely wouldn't be nice to him. Zhuowen's aura was too weak. It would be strange if Luo Suo took the initiative to greet him. Yao Xiong, who is the other person? Luo Suo suddenly asked in a muffled voice. Yao Xiong smiled mysteriously and said, You will know soon. I think you all know this guy. Seeing the mysterious look on Yao Xiong's face, Luo Suo curled his lips and didn't ask any more questions. The Ghost Curse Lady's face was gloomy because she had suffered a loss at Zhuowen's hands. Naturally, she was not in the mood to ask more questions. Zhuowen, on the other hand, was new to this place, so he naturally would not ask more questions. The 4 of them waited for another hour. Suddenly, a violent whistling sound came from the sky. Then, a huge black vortex appeared in the depths of the sky. In the terrifying black vortex, the sound of horse hooves could be heard. It was as if a divine horse was rapidly approaching from the depths of the vortex. The black vortex sank rapidly in the shape of an inverted funnel. At the tip of the funnel, an incomparably handsome black horse could be vaguely seen. It was as if the black horse was carrying the terrifying black vortex with it as it rolled over. Rumble! The black horse landed on the ground, and the area within a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles shattered, while the black vortex slowly dissipated. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed slightly as his attention fell on the man on the black horse. This man looked to be about 30 years old. He was wearing a black armor that looked like fish scales. His face was covered with a dark mask, making him look like a ferocious demon. What made Zhuowen's heart sink was that this person's aura was extremely vast, even stronger than that of the enforcement elder of the dark fantasy sect, but far inferior to Yu Wuxi. Zhuowen guessed that this person's cultivation was probably at the 7th level of the Void Sky realm, and it was very likely that he was at the peak of the 7th level. Now that Juan was facing this person, even if he used all his trump cards, his chances of winning were not high. After all, the reason Juan was able to kill the law enforcement elder of the Void Sky 7 stage was all because of the power of the Purple Star Sovereign in the Thunderfire Sword. During the battle, Xiao He had already used up all of the power of the Purple Star Sovereign. With Yuowen's current strength, he was comparable to a cultivator of the Void Sky 6 stage, but it was still difficult for him to fight against a cultivator of the Void Sky 7 stage. Of course, Yuowen's cultivation was at the Void Sky 5th stage, and his doppelganger had become Real God Extreme Fire. Hence, Yuan was not afraid of a cultivator of the Void Sky 7 stage. King Spirit? I didn't expect you to invite him over, Luo Suo frowned and said with fear. Lady Ghost Curse also came back to her senses and could not help but exclaim softly. There was a tinge of fear in her eyes. Of course, the person that Lady Ghost Curse was afraid of was not Jun, but the man on the black horse who was slowly approaching. King Spirit? Juan muttered. It was his first time seeing this person. However, this person's cultivation was so strong that even Juan was afraid of him. He knew that this King Spirit must be very famous in the land of Far West. Otherwise, Luo Suo and Lady Ghost Curse would not be so frightened. The King Spirit came to Yao Xiong and then dismounted. He looked at the people around him and finally looked at Yao Xiong and said, I thought you would find some good helpers. Why are you looking for a bunch of trash? As soon as he said this, Luo Suo, who was surrounded by chains, looked at the King Spirit coldly and said, What did you say? Who's trash? The King Spirit tilted his head and looked at Luo Suo indifferently and said, What do you think? Since you know it, then don't say it out loud. Trash should still act like trash. Clang. Luo Suo roared and swung his right hand. The chains on his body began to move rapidly like snakes. Then, hundreds of black chains turned into countless water pillars and shot toward the King Spirit. Yao Xiong frowned but did not do anything. In his opinion, Luo Suo was too impulsive. Attacking the King Spirit was asking for trouble. The King Spirit's lips curled into an evil smile, and his eyes suddenly turned white. It was a strange sight to behold. Bang, bang, bang. The hundreds of chains that were originally rushing over were all shattered, turning into countless black powder that scattered in the air. Puchi! Luo Suo spat out a mouthful of blood and flew backward. His face was pale and bloodless. The Ghost Curse lady trembled as she looked at the Emperor's spirit in horror. Zhuowen frowned. He realized that he had underestimated the King Spirit. The King Spirit was much stronger than the law enforcement elder of the demonic fantasy sect. The Emperor's spirit glanced at Zhuowen. Zhuowen didn't seem to be surprised when he sent the chains flying. He didn't even see the fear in Zhuowen's eyes like the Ghost Curse lady did. Although Zhuowen's reaction was strange, the King Spirit did not think much of it. After all, in his opinion, Zhuowen was just an ant. Even if he was a little special, he would not care. Shall we go now? The King Spirit looked at Yao Xiong and asked. Yes. Yao Xiong nodded and waved his sleeve. A streamlined flying ship appeared in front of him. This flying ship was much smaller than the God Lu. It could only seat 10 people at most. However, Zhuan could see that this flying ship was many times better than the God Lu. In a dangerous place like the Sea of Magnets, this flying ship was much faster than the God Lu. Yao Xiong and the King Spirit were the first to enter the cabin. Zhuowen and the Ghost Curse lady followed closely behind. Luo Suo staggered and entered the cabin with difficulty. Everyone entered the cabin. The flying ship spewed out blue exhaust and flew away. Trash, we will need you to enter the Yinyang Yuan K later. Take this pill. The King Spirit, who was sitting in the front, flicked his finger and gave 3 pills to Zhuowen, the Ghost Curse lady, and Luo Suo. Seeing the confusion in Zhuowen and the Ghost Curse lady's eyes, the King Spirit smiled and said, This thing is good for your injuries. Take it. If you are injured, take it. It will heal your injuries quickly. Zhuowen's eyes flashed, but he was wary. He did not believe the King Spirit would be so kind as to give them such good pills. Half a month later, the flying ship passed through many asteroids and magnetic seas. Finally, they arrived at their destination, the Yinyang Yuan Quebec. The waning waxing moons was an incomparably huge galaxy, and it was much, much bigger than all the other galaxies. The shape of the Inyang Yuan K was like the moon. Sometimes it was like a crescent moon, and sometimes it was like a full moon. It was like the moon of the year. It was because of this feature that it was called the Inyang Yuan Quebec. In the far west, there were almost no galaxies. Most of them were asteroids. The reason for this was, as mentioned before, caused by the battle between great Brahma and goddess Luo. The entire land of the far west had been reduced to ruins. The star system had shattered, and only these ownerless asteroids of different sizes were left. The cultivators of the far west basically built their own forces and lived on these meteorites. After this kind of star system declined, the energy inside the star system would become very unstable and would often go berserk. Therefore, cultivators who wandered inside would easily die if they weren't careful. Even void sky cultivators were no exception. The asteroids around the Inyang Yuan K were densely packed like locusts. There were more asteroids than anywhere else in the magnetic sea. Most of these asteroids were stalls set up by cultivators, inns, shops, and other facilities built by some forces. Although the Inyang Yuan K was a terrifying place, it was the most prosperous place in the far west. It was also the place with the most cultivators. Of course, there were many experts here. They were like carps crossing the river. Naturally, their numbers were not small. The Inyang Yuan K has many entrances. Most of these entrances were opened by our ancestors. However, the entrance we're going to this time has not been opened by humans. I think it's best for everyone to keep it a secret, Yao Xiong said to the people behind him. Zhuowen frowned slightly. Ever since the Emperor's spirit arrived, Yao Xiong's attitude towards them had become much colder. The Emperor's spirit sneered. If anyone dares to gossip outside, you'll have to bear the consequences. Although the three people present did not like the Emperor's spirit's threat, they could not refute it now that the map fragment was in Yao Xiong's hands. After a while, the flying ship stopped on an extremely remote asteroid in the Inyang Yuan Quebec. Chapter 2078. The ancient sword tomb. The landing of the flying ship immediately attracted the attention of the cultivators on the meteor. The cultivators looked at the flying ship in awe and only dared to sneak a peek. It was obvious that this flying ship was expensive. The cultivator who could ride this flying ship must be an expert. Yao Xiong and the others got off the flying ship quietly. The king's spirit looked around with a bloodthirsty look. Black lightning. The king's spirit chuckled, and a black vortex appeared above him. It covered the entire meteorite in the blink of an eye. The sound of hooves could be heard again from the black vortex. The king's spirit leaped onto the black horse's back. Like a bolt of black lightning, it cut through the void and dashed across the meteorite. Swoosh, swoosh. Every time the black horse dashed across the meteorite, it killed a cultivator. There were not many cultivators on the meteorite, but there were still a few hundred of them. Seeing the king's spirit's killing spree, the cultivators on the meteorite were terrified. Some cried, some ran away, and some fought back. But in the end, they were killed by the king's spirit. After a while, the cultivators on the meteorite were all killed by the king's spirit. The black vortex dissipated, leaving the 5 of them standing alone on the meteorite. Zhuowen frowned and looked at Yao Xiong. He did not expect the king's spirit to be so unreasonable as to kill those who had nothing to do with him. Yao Xiong smiled and said, "Don't be surprised. We're being cautious this time. The fewer people who know about this, the better." Seeing the smile on Yao Xiong's face, the ghost curse lady and Luo Sua's hearts skipped a beat. Zhuowen's eyes were cold, but he did not say anything. Yao Xiong, open the entrance. The king's spirit looked at Yao Xiong and said. Yao Xiong nodded and walked to the edge of the meteorite. He formed a seal with both hands and took out a palm-sized brown bead from his spiritual ring. He threw it forward. Swoosh. Suddenly, a huge arched door appeared in front of them. "Go in." Yao Xiong looked at Zhuowen and the other 2 behind him and invited them in with a smile. "Yao Xiong, don't you trust us?" Luo Sua asked in a deep voice. The king's spirit laughed and said, "Why do you have so much to say? If you don't want to go in, you might end up like those cultivators on the meteorite." Facing the king's spirit's threat, Luo Sua's face changed, but he didn't dare do anything. After all, he had just been taught a lesson. With a cold snort, he strode into the arched door. His figure quickly disappeared. Zhuan and the Lady of the Cursed Ghost followed closely behind. They did not waste any time like Luo Su. After Zhuan and the others entered the door, King Spirit and Yao Xiong did not rush to follow. Yao Xiong, are you sure these three are useful? The King Spirit asked. Brother D, don't you trust me? The Ghost Curse Lady is proficient in curses and arrays, especially the power of curses. She will be of great help to us when we enter the Luotian Palace. That lock has boundless strength and can help us fend off many dangers in the Luotian Palace ruins. Furthermore, it can be used as a life-saving cannon fodder in times of crisis. Yao Xiong laughed. The King's Spirit nodded and said, What about Zhuan? His cultivation level is too low. What can he do? Yao Xiong smiled mysteriously and said, Zhuan is also proficient in arrays. Most importantly, his soul is far stronger than the average cultivators. Do you think he will be useful? Strong soul? How strong is it? The King's Spirit asked, his eyes flashing. Yao Xiong laughed and said, Perhaps as strong as you. He is the key to our success. The King's Spirit's eyes lit up. They were indeed lacking cultivators with low cultivation levels but powerful souls. Generally speaking, cultivators with powerful souls were not weak. They did not dare to provoke such cultivators. However, this was the first time they had seen someone like Zhuan. There was a crucial place in the Luotian Palace ruins that required Zhuan's help. Zhuan felt that the world was spinning. Countless light spots around him disappeared in an instant. However, when they stopped, a huge fireball the size of a washbasin appeared in front of him, whistling towards him. Zhuan pulled out the glorious purple galaxy sword. The sword light was like water. It slashed across the fireball, shattering it into countless sparks. At this moment, Zhuan realized that there were many such fireballs around him. They were densely packed together. Luo Su'a and the Ghost Curse Lady, who appeared beside him, also used their special powers to destroy the oncoming fireballs. While blocking the oncoming fireballs, Zhuan began to observe his surroundings. He realized that there was a 7-colored fog around him. This fog was very strange. Visibility was very low. Even with Zhuan's eyesight, he could only see 10 meters around him. When he looked around, other than the oncoming fireballs, there was only the 7-colored fog. Luo Su'a and the Ghost Curse Lady were not far away from him. That was why he could see them immediately. At this moment, the three of them were gathered together. Although they did not see eye to eye, they were now in a dangerous place. They put their grudges aside and dealt with the trouble in front of them first. The three of you, go straight down. We are not far from your feet. Suddenly, Yao Xiong's voice appeared in their minds. The three of them looked at each other and went straight down. After a while, they landed on solid ground. The three of them realized that they were on a cliff. In front of the cliff was a chain bridge that connected to the opposite cliff. It looked very dangerous. Yao Xiong and the King's Spirit were at the entrance of the chain bridge. At this moment, Yao Xiong turned around and smiled at Zhuan and the others. He said, This place is quite far from the Luotian Palace ruins. I hope that the three of you will listen to me. Otherwise, if anything happens, I will not be responsible. I have no objections. Zhuan was the first to speak. The specific route was with Yao Xiong. If they did not follow him, were they supposed to wander around by themselves? Luo Su'a and Lady Ghost Curse had no objections. Yao Xiong reminded the King's Spirit, and then he and the King's Spirit stepped onto the bridge and walked to the other side. Hearing Yao Xiong's words, Zhuan could not help but recall the densely packed fireballs that had attacked the three of them when they were hovering in the air. But now that they had landed on the ground, the attacking fireball had disappeared without a trace. It seemed that flying in the air was forbidden here. Otherwise, one would be attacked by the laws of this place. After crossing the iron chain bridge, there was a vast and boundless plain on the other side. On the other hand, the originally dense 7-colored fog had become much thinner on the plains. At this moment, Zhuan could see his surroundings clearly. There was a plain in front of him, and above the plain, there were countless twinkling colorful stars. These stars were all planets in the waning waxing moons. However, almost all of these planets were dying. Soon, these planets would completely collapse and decay along with the waning waxing moons. These bright stars were actually the final radiance of these dying planets. The closer they were to death, the more dazzling the light released by the planets would be until they finally exploded. The group of 5 silently traversed the plains, not saying a single word. The atmosphere was lifeless. At the end of the plain, there was an endless void. Zhuan frowned and could not help but look at Yao Xiong in front of him. Yao Xiong wasn't flustered at all. His right hand formed into a claw as he suddenly clawed at the ground beneath his feet, and he directly tore out a rock that was over 3 m in size as he said, "The laws within the yin-yang waxing moons will cause backlash to cultivators that fly in the sky, but if we step on the rocks here to fly in the sky, it practically won't cause any backlash." After saying that, Yao Xiong stepped on the stone and rushed forward. The king's spirit followed closely behind. Zhuan also tore off a piece of rock and flew into the air, following after him. The 5 of them flew for 10 days and 10 nights. Suddenly, they were alarmed by a huge movement not far away. In front of them, there was a huge circular island-shaped continent. However, this continent looked lifeless. But now, on this lifeless continent, densely packed figures were constantly flying over it, accompanied by sharp battles and screams of agony. What happened on this continent? Luo Suo frowned and whispered, "Why don't we go and see?" Yao Xiong chuckled as he rushed forward. This continent was very large. It was surrounded by a dark fog and there were brown and black withered branches everywhere. It looked very strange and gloomy. Zhuan's divine sense spread out and found that in the center of this continent was a huge graveyard. In the center of this graveyard, there was a huge stone coffin floating. The surface of the stone coffin was surrounded by dense black chains. Within a range of 10,000 miles around the stone coffin, there were many long swords. Most of these long swords were quite old. However, the aura of each long sword was extremely sharp and powerful. At a glance, one could tell that each of these ancient swords was unusual. This is the ancient sword tomb. There are 9,999 ancient swords here. They were forged by the extremely famous ancient sword Saint King. After the ancient sword Saint King died, he buried himself here and used the 9,999 ancient swords he forged in his life as his tombstone. Back then, the ancient sword Saint King said that every ancient sword he created was spiritual. If it met a fated person, the ancient sword would choose its master. Yao Xiong laughed. Zhuan had heard a little about the ancient sword Saint King. It was said that this guy became famous much earlier than Luoshan. Back then, before the land of the far west was like this, the ancient sword Saint King was already famous in the great Brahma domain. Before Luoshan, he was the only peerless genius outside of the star field whose cultivation had reached 8 void sky steps. Chapter 2079. The Strange Broken Sword. Haha, the opening time of the ancient sword tomb is not fixed. We just entered the waning waxing K and the ancient sword tomb opened. Looks like our luck is not bad. Yao Xiong's eyes blazed. Sush, sush, sush. As soon as Yao Xiong finished speaking, the Emperor's spirit took the lead and flew into the ancient sword tomb like a rainbow. He said coldly, "The opening of the ancient sword tomb depends on your luck. Contact each other after the tomb closes." The moment the Emperor's spirit flew out, Lady Cursing Ghost and Luo Suo also rushed out without hesitation. Obviously, they knew the ancient sword tomb well. Only Zhuan was confused. He looked at Yao Xiong, who was not far away. Yao Xiong looked at Zhuan and said with a smile, "Brother Zhua, the opening of the ancient sword tomb means that the ancient swords are looking for their fated ones. It's also the time for cultivators to find their own opportunities. It's hard to say. Brother Zhua, you'll know once you enter the ancient sword tomb. Of course, I'll contact you after the ancient sword tomb closes, Brother Zhua." After saying that, Yao Xiong went into the ancient sword tomb. Zhuan frowned and looked at the ancient sword tomb again. Sword lights flashed like stars in the sky above the ancient sword tomb. Zhuan saw that the 9,999 ancient swords that were stuck in the ground had flown up into the sky and were revolving around the huge stone coffin, forming a huge sword light storm. Around the storm of sword light, many cultivators' eyes were burning with desire. They rushed into the storm of sword light to snatch the ancient swords they had their eyes on. Unfortunately, most of the ancient swords let out ear-piercing sword cries the moment the cultivator grabbed the sword hilt and violently flung the cultivator away. The same thing happened everywhere in the ancient sword tomb. Some cultivators who were not strong enough could not resist the terrifying tearing force of the sword light storm and were torn to pieces. Suddenly, a figure shot out from the storm of sword light. Then he looked around and suddenly flew into the distance. As soon as this person left, some of the clever cultivators in the surroundings followed and attacked together, strangling this person to death. As soon as the person died, a sword light flew out. It was an ancient sword. It seemed that this person was fated with one of the ancient swords in the ancient sword tomb, so the sword chose this cultivator. Unfortunately, this cultivator's strength was too weak. He was simply not a match for the surrounding cultivators. As a result, he was besieged and killed by so many cultivators. As for the ancient sword, after the cultivator died, it turned back into a sword light and merged into the sword light storm. Zhuan slowly landed in the ancient sword tomb and looked up at the swords that had turned into a sword light storm. From time to time, there would be cultivators flying in the ancient sword tomb, trying to snatch the ancient swords. Zhuan's divine sense, he noticed that the Emperor Spirit was in the middle of the sword light storm. Its sword spirit was a sword spirit sword tomb. A sword spirit was 2 feet long and one long sword was 1. Sword was inlaid in the middle was sword. A sword in the middle, it was in the golden sword. Sword was it? With Zhuan's knowledge, he could tell that this ancient sword was much stronger than the other ancient swords in the sword light storm. The king's spirit grabbed the sword with his right hand, and a massive amount of god power formed a chain around the sword. The ancient sword let out an angry sword hum as it continuously twisted its body. The sword light poured out like water, but it was useless. The king's spirit was a 7th level elite. Although it was far weaker than the ancient sword Saint King, it was still strong enough to take the sword that had been forged by the ancient sword Saint King. After struggling to no avail, the giant sword finally stopped screaming and surrendered to the king's spirit's power. The king's spirit grinned and put away the sword. Just as he was about to try and claim the second sword, a powerful attack came from the coffin in the middle of the tomb. It was headed straight for the king's spirit. The king's spirit's face changed. He clenched his right fist and punched the incoming attack. Bang bang bang. A series of explosions sounded, and the king's spirit was forced out of the sword light storm's range. Ancient sword tomb. The fated one can only claim one ancient sword. Do not be greedy. The voice from the coffin was deafening and thought-provoking. The king's spirit frowned. In the end, he did not enter the sword light storm again. He knew very well that although the ancient sword Saint King was dead, the divine sense he left behind was very powerful. He was no match for it. As for the surrounding cultivators, after the king's spirit was forced out of the sword light storm, they scattered like frightened birds. They did not dare to get close to the king's spirit. Although many cultivators wanted to attack the fated one who claimed the ancient sword, it depended on the person. The king's spirit's aura was as vast as the ocean. It was obvious that he was a high-level void sky elite. How could they dare to snatch such a powerful elite? Unless they were tired of living. The king's spirit also noticed Zhuan not far away, but after a glance, he ignored him. He took out the ancient sword and planned to refine it openly. The king's spirit's actions were arrogant. Wasn't it obvious that he wanted others to come and snatch it? Zhuan ignored the king's spirit and jumped into the storm of sword lights. Zhuan was good at using swords. If he could find a better ancient sword in the sword light storm, he might be able to replace the glorious purple galaxy sword. After all, as Zhuan's cultivation increased, the glorious purple galaxy sword was not as useful to him. After all, it was a divine sword that Zhuan had refined when he was at the peak of the sky celestial stage. It was not a void sky divine weapon. This ancient sword Saint King was an old monster of the void sky 8 steps. Moreover, the aura released from the sarcophagus just now was even more magnificent than Yu Wuxi's. It seemed like this ancient sword Saint King was much stronger than Yu Wuxi when he was alive. Zhuan did not know how terrifying the ancient sword sage king was. The ancient sword sage king was only half a step away from the 9 steps void sky. His strength was so strong that even Lord Brahma could not help but praise him. Although Yu Wuxi was also at the 8 steps void heaven realm, he was still a distance away from the peak. Moreover, this old man had suffered serious injuries in the past. Although he had taken the heavenly domain star essence, it had dragged on for too long. He had already developed some hidden injuries, and his strength had declined a lot compared to the past. An ancient sword forged by such an existence must be a top-quality void sky divine weapon. If Zhuan could obtain one, it would be greatly beneficial to his strength. Moreover, the fated one did not have to be fated. If one was strong enough to subdue an ancient sword, they could be considered fated. Just now, the king's spirit had used the same method to forcibly subdue an ancient sword. I can only choose one ancient sword. I have to consider it carefully. Shuttling through the storm of sword light, Zhuan resisted the tearing force around him while using his powerful consciousness to observe the uniqueness of the swords in the storm. Zhuan's divine sense was so powerful that it was like countless tentacles. In an instant, it spread through the entire sword light storm. Zhuan could clearly observe the uniqueness of each ancient sword and even compare them. As Zhuan's cultivation continued to improve, his divine sense also increased. Strictly speaking, Zhuan's divine sense was stronger than the 7 steps void sky divine weapon. In this sword light storm, Zhuan was like a fish in water. Not only could he rely on his divine sense to travel quickly, but he could also quickly compare the various ancient swords. This ancient sword, Zhuan's eyes suddenly narrowed. In his divine sense, he found a rusty broken sword floating near the center of the sword light storm. This broken sword looked very ordinary, and it was extremely damaged. It looked very broken. If one didn't pay close attention, one wouldn't pay too much attention to this mediocre-looking ancient sword among so many ancient swords. But Zhuan's eyes were particularly dignified. This was because when this broken sword floated in the air, the other ancient swords around it all retreated. It was as if they were in awe of this ugly broken sword. Zhuan's divine sense was very strong, and this scene was unintentionally seen by him. If he hadn't seen this scene, Zhuan wouldn't have paid attention to this broken sword. Zhuan also found that this broken sword was very low-key. It was basically floating in a relatively secluded place. It was only because the broken sword had casually moved a certain distance that Zhuan had discovered the strange scene just now. This sword is not ordinary. Zhuan's eyes flashed as he rushed towards the broken sword. Perhaps it had sensed Zhuan's gaze, but the broken sword actually turned in his direction. Soon after, it turned back and quickly rushed forward. It was like a cat that had stolen something. When it turned back and saw its owner chasing after it, it immediately ran away. This guy is so human. It's definitely not simple. Zhuan was more and more certain that this broken sword was not ordinary. He quickly rushed forward, wanting to catch up with the broken sword. But what surprised Zhuan was that every time he was about to catch up with the broken sword, the sword light storm around him would suddenly rush over. A terrifying tearing force would reduce his speed. After the broken sword had rushed forward for a distance, the tearing force disappeared again, and Zhuan chased after it again. Zhuan felt that this broken sword seemed to be playing with him. If this was really the case, wouldn't this broken sword be able to control the strength of the sword light storm? Then what was the origin of this broken sword? Xiaohei, I'll leave that broken sword to you. Can you subdue it? Zhuan immediately summoned the Thunderfire sword and pointed forward to the broken sword that was slowly luring Zhuan to chase after it. He knew that Xiaohei liked to be a sword slave. Back then, the Blood Immortal and the Extreme Flaming Sword were both turned into sword slaves by this guy. Now that this broken sword was not ordinary, perhaps this guy would be interested. This broken sword's artifact spirit's intelligence is not low. It actually knows how to play with people. It really has the demeanor of this dragon lord back in the day. Chapter 2080. Reign of Thousand Swords. Don't worry, I'm here. I'll make this little broken sword my sword slave. Xiao He patted his chest and said confidently. Then he rushed out and summoned the Blood Immortal Sword to chase after the broken sword. Perhaps it was because the Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword were both swords, but the surrounding sword light storm did not seem to be able to stop the two at all. On the contrary, Zhuo Wen's body was continuously hindered, and he could not increase his speed at all. However, Zhuo Wen's divine sense was always paying attention to the Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword. Dragon Master, it's just a broken sword. You don't need to go out. Let Blood Disciple capture it for you. The Blood Immortal Sword said to Xiao He and then chased after the broken sword. The broken sword didn't speed up. Instead, it turned around like a human and looked at the Blood Immortal Sword up and down. It seemed to be thinking that there weren't such two strange swords in the ancient sword tomb. Surrender for me. The Blood Immortal sneered and urged the sword to rush at the broken sword and cut it down without hesitation. The Blood Immortal was very satisfied with his sword. In his opinion, this sword was enough to smash the seemingly ordinary and even broken sword into pieces. But soon, the Blood Immortal's face became very stiff. Then he flew back and screamed. The whole sword seemed very dim. Buzz. The broken sword screamed as if it was angry. Suddenly, the sword light storm around it became more terrifying. Then, the broken sword suddenly rushed out and slashed at the Blood Immortal as fast as light. So fast? Zhuo Wen's eyes narrowed. The broken sword looked ordinary, but when it attacked, it was so terrifying. The Blood Immortal screamed and cried. She also felt the threat of death and kept retreating. Bang! The Thunder Fire Sword blocked the broken sword in front of the Blood Immortal. The Thunder Fire Sword and the broken sword flew back dozens of meters at the same time, facing each other from a distance. Little Blood Disciple, you're by my side to assist me. This broken sword is not simple. Damn it, it's actually so terrifying. Xiao He said with a serious look. The Blood Immortal nodded weakly. After suffering a bit just now, this guy was much more obedient. He no longer dared to charge in front of the Thunder Fire Sword. Of course, the Blood Immortal was cursing in her heart. She had been cursing Broken Sword for being a wolf in sheep's clothing. Xiao He let out a shrill cry. Like a sticky candy, she swept towards the broken sword. However, Xiao He was very smart. She did not confront the broken sword head-on. Instead, she used guerrilla warfare. Ever since Xiao He used up all the thunder and fire energy given by Crepe Myrtle Star Monarch in the Thunder Fire Sword, this guy became a little timid. Once there was any sign of danger, it would not dare to go up and risk its life. Instead, it would let Zhuowen go first, and then it would follow. Now, Xiao He was still adhering to this principle. She would delay this strange broken sword first. When Zhuowen caught up, she would leave it to Zhuowen. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Xiao He's shameless way of fighting made the broken sword extremely angry. The broken sword let out a shrill cry and burst out a terrifying sword chi. Instantly, it blocked the Thunder Fire Sword's surroundings. Then, it turned into a sword light and swept towards the Thunder Fire Sword. Damn, this cunning guy, Xiao He cursed. However, there was nothing she could do. She could only face the sword light of the broken sword head-on. Bang! Terrifying sparks burst out. Then, Xiao He let out a shrill cry and flew backwards. The brilliance on the surface of her body became much dimmer. The broken sword's body shook. Then, it stabilized itself and continued to rush towards the Thunder Fire Sword. Master! The Blood Immortal shouted. However, she shrank to the side. She did not have any intention of protecting her master. At this moment, Zhuowen still swept forward. He slashed with the glorious Purple Galaxy Divine Sword and performed the 7th move of the Destruction Sword art, Sword Swimming Great Void. The mysterious sword art turned into a purple light and blasted out. To Zhuowen's surprise, the broken sword's casual slash had completely broken his sword art. Zhuowen's eyes were resolute. He instantly shattered 300 divine soul galaxies. His enormous divine sense condensed into a single point and attached itself to the soul-absorbing God Needle. Then, it turned into a beam of golden light and shot out, slamming heavily on the broken sword. Bang! The broken sword's movement stiffened. It was as if time had stopped. Seeing this, Zhuowen's eyes lit up. He immediately took out the heavenly starry sky marrow and swallowed a drop. His spiritual soul recovered instantly. Then he shattered 300 divine soul galaxies again. His terrifying soul consciousness was applied to the soul-absorbing God Needle again. Bang, bang, bang. Zhuan shattered the divine soul galaxies again and swallowed the heavenly starry sky marrow again and again. He repeated this 10 times. The soul-absorbing God Needle could not withstand the terrifying soul consciousness power and shattered into pieces for the 10th time. The broken sword retreated again and again. Its body was even more damaged, and its aura became dispirited. Zhuowen's eyes lit up with joy. He waved his right hand and a powerful divine force turned into a giant hand, grabbing the broken sword in the palm of his hand. Then, Zhuan used the devouring of all things to form a series of restrictions, completely grasping the struggling broken sword in his hand. After putting away the broken sword, Zhuan rushed out of the sword light storm. You're only at the 3rd step of the virtual sky realm. You're not qualified to own the ancient sword. Give it to me. Zhuan had just flown out of the sword light storm when a sinister voice sounded out. Not far away, a middle-aged man was like a cheetah, swiftly and violently flashing over and attacking Zhuan without the slightest hesitation. At the same time, several figures rushed out from other directions and rushed toward Zhuan. They also attacked Zhuan to kill him. They had no intention of leaving him alive. Because the broken sword in Zhuowen's hand was too shabby, there were not many cultivators who attacked him this time. Even if they attacked, they were virtual sky realm cultivators with ordinary cultivation. Those proud and powerful virtual sky realm cultivators would not attack for such a shabby-looking broken sword. There were more than a dozen cultivators who attacked, and almost all of them attacked with killing intent. They had no intention of leaving Zhuowen alive. Zhuowen's mouth was full of a sneer as he summoned 24 golden no-beginning devil swords. It was not worth Zhuowen to use all of his golden no-beginning devil swords to deal with more than a dozen virtual sky realm cultivators with low cultivation. Puchi. The 24 golden no-beginning devil swords drew mysterious trajectories in the void and constantly intertwined to form a terrifying vortex of killing intent. None of the cultivators who rushed over were spared by this vortex of killing intent. They were all strangled into a bloody mist and couldn't be more dead. The area around Zhuowen was covered in a rain of blood. Zhuowen's divine power formed a barrier around him, blocking the falling rain of blood. It looked extremely strange and terrifying. Zhuowen's attack immediately shocked many of the surrounding cultivators. The cultivators who originally planned to attack all stopped, not daring to act rashly. After all, the broken sword in Zhuowen's hand was really ordinary. There was no need to offend such an expert for such a broken sword. Di Ling raised his eyebrows and looked at Zhuowen again. He muttered to himself, "It seems like Yao Xiong is right. This child is not simple. His strength is not weak and his divine soul is so strong. This time, my chances of winning the Luotian Palace are much higher." Zhuowen sat cross-legged on a rock with the broken sword across his knees. His divine sense silently extended into the broken sword. He felt that this broken sword was not ordinary. After all, when he was chasing after this broken sword, it had controlled the sword light storm to stop him. It was as if this broken sword was the king of countless ancient swords and none of the other ancient swords dared to disobey it. Zhuowen scanned the broken sword inside and out. Suddenly, he stopped at the broken part of the broken sword. There was an extremely inconspicuous small hole at the broken part. This small hole was extremely dark and seemed to be unfathomably deep. It was difficult to detect the bottom. Zhuowen's divine sense explored this small hole for a few dozen breaths. Suddenly, his expression became serious. This was because at the end of the small hole, he felt a spatial barrier. Zhuowen was all too familiar with this spatial barrier. This was because the entrance to Devour's inner world had a similar spatial barrier. Zhuowen knew what it meant to have such a spatial barrier at the end of the small hole. It meant that on the other side of the spatial barrier, there was a small world. Zhuowen did not expect this broken sword to have a small world inside. Could it be that the ancient sword Saint King had left something behind in this small world? Thinking of this, Zhuowen's divine sense moved slightly. Suddenly, it passed through the spatial barrier and entered the other side of the barrier. This space was pitch black and empty. The only thing in this pitch black space was probably a huge, irregular rock that was at least 30 meters in size standing in the center of this pitch black space. In the middle of the stone, there was a sentence written in seal script. Zhuowen looked at it and found that what was written on the stone was a powerful sword manipulation technique. Moreover, this sword manipulation technique was not about controlling one divine sword, but thousands of divine swords. This sword manipulation technique was called Rain of Thousand Swords. It was said that once one learned this Rain of Thousand Swords, they would be able to control 9,999 ancient swords forged by the ancient sword Saint King. The reason why the ancient sword Saint King had worked tirelessly to forge so many ancient swords was actually because of this Rain of Thousand Swords. This stone also recorded that the Rain of Thousand Swords was not created by the ancient sword Saint King. He had obtained it by accident. It was precisely because of this thousand-sword rain sword controlling technique that the ancient sword Sacred King was able to rise so quickly and eventually become the strongest person in the far Westland. Even in the entire Great Brahma domain, he was still an incredible expert. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed slightly, but his heart was beating fast. Although he had not finished reading, he could already feel the terror of this sword manipulation technique. Just think about it. If one could control 9,999 divine swords, and each of them was of the highest quality, one could imagine how terrifying the power of so many divine swords would be. I must learn this sword manipulation technique. Chapter 2081. Eerie Footsteps. The imperial sword technique Rain of Thousand Swords was quite complicated and required a period of time to practice. However, Zhuowen had the fire spirit juice, a divine medicine that could temporarily increase his perception, and his divine sense was extremely powerful. He believed that it would not take too much time to fully comprehend this Rain of Thousand Swords. Thinking of this, Zhuowen quietly stored the broken sword in his inner world and handed it to the black-clothed Zhuowen. The black-clothed Zhuowen's divine sense was connected to Zhuowen's. As long as the black-clothed Zhuowen fully comprehended the Rain of Thousand Swords, Zhuowen's original body would naturally learn it as well. However, the black-clothed Zhuowen's original body was Devour. Naturally, the original body would not know some of Devour's special abilities. However, the two of them could use some special abilities together. For example, the golden sword of no beginning could be used by both the original body and the doppelganger. After handing the broken sword to the black-clothed Zhuowen, Zhuowen's gaze fell on the ancient sword tomb in front of him. The terrifying sword light storm was shrinking. Then, the countless divine swords hidden in the storm fell like rain and stabbed into the ground of the ancient sword tomb. A vast repulsion force spread out from the stone coffin in the center of the ancient sword tomb. Then, the cultivators in the sword light storm flew out and landed outside the ancient sword tomb. Zhuowen followed the crowd and left the ancient sword tomb. He knew that the ancient sword tomb was officially closed. He looked around at the over 9,000 ancient swords stabbed into the ground of the ancient sword tomb. His eyes were burning with passion. He knew that as long as he mastered the Rain of Thousand Swords, he would be able to control the 9,000 divine swords left behind by the ancient sword Sage King. His strength would definitely improve. Gather at the entrance of the ancient sword tomb. Suddenly, Yao Xiong's voice rang in his mind. Zhuowen thought for a moment and rushed toward the entrance of the ancient sword tomb. When he arrived at the entrance, Yuan found that the other four had all gathered. Among the four of them, the Ghost Curse Lady and Luo Suo were expressionless. It seemed that they did not gain much in the ancient sword tomb. The king's spirit, however, looked at Zhuowen with a mocking smile. Zhuowen didn't like the way the spirit looked at him. It was as if Zhuowen had become the king's spirit's plaything. Now that the ancient sword tomb is closed, there's nothing else of value here other than the ancient sword tomb. Let's continue our journey. Yao Xiong said, then led the crowd away from this place. Within the waning waxing moons, there were many stars and continents. Almost every star and continent had many adventurers and cultivators searching for treasures, hoping for a fortuitous encounter. Yao Xiong and the others completely ignored the cultivators on the star continent. Instead, they followed the route provided by the map fragment and headed straight towards the depths of the waning waxing moons. Along the way, the five of them also encountered many troublesome giant starry sky beasts. Not only were the laws imperfect, but there were also more astral beasts inside than outside. It was as if all the astral beasts that were scarce in the outside world were all gathered here. From time to time, they would encounter obstacles from astral beasts. We're almost there. Let's quickly get rid of these giant starry sky beasts. The Luo God Palace ruins are just ahead, Yao Xiong suddenly said. The other four, who had been casually dealing with the giant starry sky beasts, suddenly became alert. They used their powerful divine powers and techniques to kill all the giant starry sky beasts that surrounded them. After eliminating the giant starry sky beasts, the five of them landed on a star continent shrouded in white mist. Is it restricting divine senses? Lady Ghost Curse frowned and whispered. Zhuan and Luo Suo both frowned. Zhuan's divine senses were extremely powerful. Although he could still extend his divine senses far away, he could clearly feel that there was a mysterious force in the white mist that was suppressing his divine senses. However, Yao Xiong and the king's spirit looked normal. It was probably not the first time they had entered this place. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so calm. Let's move on. The Luo God Palace ruins are not far from us. Yao Xiong smiled slightly and walked forward side by side with the king's spirit. Zhuowen, on the other hand, followed closely behind with a calm gaze. Luo Suo and Lady Ghost Curse, on the other hand, looked bewildered. Both of them were beginning to think of retreating. Wealth comes from danger. Follow them. Luo Suo gritted his teeth and chased after them. Although the Ghost Curse lady was uneasy, she wasn't afraid at this time. A long, winding path appeared in front of the white mist. Zhuan followed and found that Yao Xiong and the king's spirit were walking very slowly. As Yao Xiong walked, the 5 fingers on his right hand moved slightly and his mouth muttered something. It was as if he was deducing something. Zhuowen carefully observed this small path, and only then did he discover that this small path was set up with extremely powerful and terrifying restrictions, and Yao Xiong was deducing the method to break this restriction. Brother Zhuo, Lady Ghost Curse, you two are not weak in Array Dao. Come with me. The restriction spell on the way to the Luo God Palace ruins is very powerful. It can't be completely broken. It can only be temporarily offset. To be honest, back then, Brother D and I made a trip here. Back then, it took us half a year to finally open up a temporary path and reach the Luotian Palace ruins. It hasn't been that long. The temporary path that I spent half a year to open back then has disappeared without a trace. Now we can only open a new path. Yao Xiong smiled bitterly. Brother Yao, you are too polite. Now that we are in the same boat, we have to work together. The Ghost Curse lady said quickly. Zhuan just nodded and didn't say anything. Yao Xiong smiled slightly and then taught the two of them how to deduce the restriction spell on the path. Although the restriction spell on the path was terrifying, there was a pattern to it. The Ghost Curse lady and Zhuowen's Array Dao was not low, so they quickly figured out the pattern. Next, the 3 of them continued to deduce and work together to open a new path to the Luo God Palace ruins in the center of the continent. Although the 3 of them were together this time, it took them 2 months to finally reach the center of the continent. During these 2 months, while Zhuowen was deducing the restriction spell, he was also constantly observing Yao Xiong and the Ghost Curse lady's Array Dao techniques. He constantly compared them, and Zhuowen's Array Dao skills improved imperceptibly. Zhuowen, who was originally a level 5 Divine Array Master, had improved his understanding of Array Dao to a whole new level after 2 months. He had actually reached level 6 in one leap. After passing through the canyon in front, we will reach the Luo God Palace ruins, but Yao Xiong stopped. His eyes were filled with fear as he pointed at the canyon in front of them with his right hand. The canyon was very narrow. It was only about 20 feet wide. Occasionally, some stones would roll down the canyon, making ear-piercing sounds. Other than that, it was completely silent. At the front of the canyon, the fog was thicker. Due to the thick fog, the other four could not see much. However, Zhuan's divine sense was different. His divine sense was far more penetrative than ordinary cultivators. He extended his divine sense into the canyon and scanned it. Suddenly, he stopped at the end of the canyon. At the end of the canyon, he could vaguely see a figure sitting cross-legged. The figure was as thin as firewood. When Zhuan wanted to see the figure clearly, the fog around him suddenly rolled and began to devour his divine sense. Zhuan was shocked. He quickly withdrew his divine sense and revealed a look of lingering fear. Everyone, be careful in this canyon. When you enter, don't use your divine sense. Otherwise, you will have to bear the consequences. The king's spirit gave a rare reminder and glanced at Zhuan. Let's go. The real danger lies behind the canyon. Everyone, don't let your guard down. Yao Xiong reminded him in an indifferent tone as he cautiously entered the canyon. Zhuan followed behind with a slight frown on his face. What exactly was that figure that his divine sense detected just now? At that time, when he wanted to see the true face of this figure, the surrounding fog became unscrupulous and forcibly squeezed out his divine sense. The canyon was not long. Soon, the five of them reached the second half of the canyon. Zhuan's gaze fell on the end of the canyon. To his surprise, there was no figure at the end of the canyon. There was nothing at all. Did I see an illusion? Zhuan muttered to himself and began to doubt himself. That's not right. My spiritual sense can't be wrong. Moreover, the sudden raging of the mist doesn't seem to be an illusion. Otherwise, my spiritual sense wouldn't have suffered such damage. Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he pondered. Don't move. Suddenly, Yao Xiong, who was walking in front, stopped abruptly. Zhuan also stopped, and his eyes were filled with confusion. Not only Zhuowen, but also the ghost curse lady and Luo Su. Just as Luo Suo was about to speak, Yao Xiong said again, Everyone, don't move. Don't use your divine sense. Otherwise, if something happens, don't blame me for not warning you. Zhuan narrowed his eyes. He found that Yao Xiong's body was trembling. Even the king spirit's eyes were strange and there was a trace of fear in them. Even the king spirit showed such an expression. Zhuan was even more confused. He didn't know what was going on. Suddenly, Zhuowen felt a bone-chilling coldness spread throughout his body, causing him to stiffen to the point that he couldn't move. It felt as if he was frozen in ice and couldn't move at all. Thump, thump, thump. Suddenly, silent footsteps slowly came from behind. The sound of footsteps was very slow and light, but it was as sharp and piercing as the edge of a blade. Zhuowen's pupils constricted. He could not help but feel nervous. Especially as the footsteps got closer and closer, the nervousness in Zhuowen's heart grew. Furthermore, as the footsteps got closer and closer, Zhuowen had the urge to turn around and take a look. What the hell is this? Chapter 2082. The martyr. Due to his position, Zhuan could see part of the scene behind him from the corner of his eye. An extremely skinny figure slowly appeared in his line of sight. It's him! When the thin figure appeared in front of Zhuowen's heart skipped a beat. He could not help but recall the thin figure that his divine sense had detected in the canyon. He dared to conclude that the strange figure that appeared in his line of sight was the emaciated figure that his divine sense had detected earlier. It was a thin old man in a black Taoist robe. He had no hair, and the strange thing was that his lower body was transparent. Zhuan could clearly see the dense blood vessels and meridians in his lower body. The man slowly walked over. There was no life in his eyes, as if he was a living dead. Thump, thump, thump. The footsteps were getting closer and closer. The man finally stopped a few steps behind the five people. Luo Suo was at the back of the five people. He could clearly feel a bone-chilling coldness. It was getting stronger and stronger. He could not help but tremble. When the thin old man came to a position next to Luo Suo's eyes fell on the thin old man. A cold light flashed in his eyes. At this moment, the skinny old man's footsteps came to a halt. Then he slowly turned around. His empty eyes stared straight at Luo Suo. Luo Suo frowned slightly. When their eyes met, his heart could not help but tremble. Then, his eyes were filled with confusion. The illusory heavenly bridge in Luo Suo's body began to slowly appear in the air. Zhuan was shocked. He could clearly see that Luo Suo's illusory heavenly bridge was slowly approaching the thin old man. Finally, it completely merged into the old man's body. After the illusory heavenly bridge entered the old man's body, Zhuan found that Luo Suo's eyes were as empty as the old man's. He looked as if he had lost his soul. The old man turned around and continued to walk forward. Luo Suo also raised his feet and followed the old man silently. Both Zhuan and the Ghost Curse Lady were shocked by this strange scene, especially the Ghost Curse Lady. She quickly closed her eyes, her body trembling and her face turning pale. The old man walked silently. Luo Suo, who was following behind him, gradually lost his hair. The lower half of his body gradually became transparent. Dense blood vessels protruded from the lower half of his body, making him look exceptionally strange. The old man didn't stop and continued to move forward. However, when he passed by Zhuan felt that the chill in his body was much heavier than before. Moreover, he keenly sensed that a soulless gaze fell on him. Zhuan knew that the owner of this gaze was definitely this strange skinny old man. Zhuan's heart trembled. He forced himself to calm down and closed his eyes, not intending to meet the old man's gaze. It wasn't until the skinny old man's footsteps gradually faded away that Zhuan slowly opened his eyes. Only then did he realize that his back was completely soaked in sweat. It was very uncomfortable to be stuck to his back. After the old man left, the bone-chilling cold in the surroundings finally disappeared completely. Yao Xiong trembled and wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. The king's spirit and the Ghost Curse Lady also let out a sigh of relief. Yao Xiong, who was that thing? The Ghost Curse Lady asked with lingering fear. That was a martyr. It is said that when Luo Shen died in battle and moved the Luo Shen Palace to the waning crescent, there weren't many disciples left in the Luo Shen Palace. However, the few remaining disciples had a deep obsession. They had to revive the Luo Shen Palace. Just like that, they were trapped here day after day, year after year, and finally died with this obsession. However, after they died, they didn't turn into a pile of yellow dust. Instead, they became martyrs who were neither human nor ghost. Yao Xiong spoke tirelessly and briefly about the origins of the martyrs. Can cultivators also become martyrs? Zhuan asked with a sharp gaze. Yao Xiong smiled and said, "Didn't you see what happened to Luo Suo? What's the point of asking this?" Zhuan was silent. Just as Yao Xiong had said, once a cultivator's spiritual sense or eyes met with a martyr, they would be assimilated by the martyr and become the next martyr that was neither human nor ghost. Are there many martyrs here? The Ghost Curse Lady suddenly asked. Yao Xiong said solemnly, "I'm not too sure. This is the second time Brother D and I have entered this place. Last time, we also encountered martyrs and almost half of them were taken away. This time, we only brought 5 people, and one of them was taken away." Sigh. Speaking of this, Yao Xiong sighed softly. No one knew whether he was sighing for Luo Suo or for his companion who was taken away last time. "Brother Yao, if there are such terrifying martyrs here, why didn't you tell me before we came in? If I knew there were such things here, I wouldn't have agreed to come in." The Ghost Curse Lady's expression changed slightly, and she was quite angry. Compared to the treasures in the Luo Shen Palace ruins, the Ghost Curse Lady valued the latter more. The king's spirit sneered and said, "Trash will always be trash. You're retreating after such a small setback." Yao Xiong stopped the king's spirit from mocking her. He looked at her and said, "If you really want to back down, I won't stop you. But let me tell you this, if you don't have the map, you won't be able to leave this place." The Ghost Curse Lady's expression changed slightly. If she couldn't leave this place, it would be no different from death. Zhuan, on the other hand, was sneering inwardly. It seemed that Yao Xiong had already predicted that his team member would back out. Now that he had said those words, the Ghost Cursing Lady, who wanted to back out, would not dare to leave by herself. "Do you still want to leave alone?" Yao Xiong asked again. The Ghost Curse Lady's face turned pale. She shook her head and said nothing. "Let's go. We'll arrive at the Luo Shen Palace ruins after we leave the canyon. I'll need the three of you to enter the Luotian Palace ruins together. Don't worry, the three of you. I've never thought of harming you. We're all in the same boat. If we don't work together, we may all die in the Luotian Palace ruins. Yao Xiong looked at the three of them and said calmly. Walking out of the canyon, the four of them were greeted by a long stretch of mountain range. Yao Xiong led them around the mountain range and finally entered the deepest part of the mountain range. Here, there was a huge black rock that was thousands of feet tall. The pitch-black rock was completely different from other rocks. Its surface was actually suffused with a strange metallic luster. Moreover, the metallic luster was sparkling like the surface of a lake under the setting sun. Countless ripples appeared on its surface, reflecting the rays of the setting sun. Zhuan could tell at a glance that the black rock wasn't a real rock. It was just the appearance of a very powerful seal. As long as the seal was broken, the huge black rock would collapse on its own. Ghost Curse Lady, you're the most skilled in array formation here. Can you see what this seal is? Brother D and I were trapped outside the seal and couldn't enter. Yao Xiong's eyes flashed, and he suddenly smiled at the Ghost Curse Lady. Zhuan and Di Ling also looked at the Ghost Curse Lady. Although the Ghost Curse Lady had suffered a loss at Zhuo Wen's hands, it was because she had underestimated Zhuo Wen. In addition, Zhuo Wen's divine sense was stronger than the Ghost Curse Lady's. The Ghost Curse Lady was caught off guard and had no time to react. In terms of array formation skills, even Zhuo Wen, who had become a level 6 divine array master, was inferior to the Ghost Curse Lady. However, Zhuan looked at Yao Xiong and frowned slightly. He felt that some of Yao Xiong's words were not trustworthy. Although Zhuan couldn't see through Yao Xiong's array formation skills, his divine sense was much stronger than the Ghost Curse Lady's. When he was deducing the path, he felt that Yao Xiong's array formation skills were not low. He might even be stronger than the Ghost Curse Lady. Zhuan didn't know why Yao Xiong wanted to hide his array formation skills, but he knew that Yao Xiong was up to no good. The Ghost Curse Lady didn't suspect anything. She looked at the black rock in front of her seriously and said, "What kind of seal is this? We have to explore it first to know." As she said that, the Ghost Curse Lady took a few steps back and formed a seal with her hands. Suddenly, a series of hand seals appeared between her fingers. These hand seals overlapped with each other and turned into an extremely complicated seal. The Ghost Curse Lady shouted in a low voice and slammed the seal into the black rock in front of her. The moment the seal landed on the black rock, the surface of the rock seemed to melt. Strange ripples appeared on the surface of the rock, as if a stone had fallen into the water. However, the moment the ripples appeared, Zhuan clearly sensed with his divine sense that there were tiny runes in the ripples. These talisman seals were profound and obscure, and they were like talisman scrolls. Moreover, they emanated a distant and ancient aura. The Ghost Curse Lady took a few steps back again. She took a deep breath and tapped her chest 7 times in a row. 7 wisps of black gas came out of her 7 apertures. The Ghost Curse Lady was surrounded by the black gas, which contained a strong vitality. Then, she suddenly stepped forward and entered the pitch-black rock. The moment the Ghost Curse Lady's figure disappeared into the rock, the huge black rock began to tremble violently. Then, the ripples on the surface of the rock became faster and faster, and gradually became transparent. Finally, a pitch-black cave passage appeared in the transparent part. There was no light in the passage, and it was extremely deep. The Ghost Curse Lady's face was pale. She quickly retreated from the cave and gasped, "It's the 7-step rockfall formation. This is an 8th-level formation. Isn't the Luo God Palace ruins a little too extravagant to use an 8th-level formation at the entrance? Is there a way to break the formation?" Yao Xiong asked deliberately. The Ghost Curse Lady took an elixir, and her pale face eased a lot. She said in a low voice, "Of course there is, and it's very simple. Since this is the 7-step rockfall formation, when the formation was set up, it took 7 steps in this passage." Chapter 2083. 7-step falling stone matrix. Is this matrix dangerous? Yao Xiong asked. The Ghost Curse Lady shook her head and said, "This matrix has been around for countless years. Its attacking ability has long since disappeared, but its sealing ability is still intact. The person trying to break it will not be in too much danger. With my cultivation and my knowledge of matrices, I can only take 4 steps at most. That is my limit. The ghost curse lady looked at Yao Xiong and the others calmly. Her meaning was clear. She had already deciphered the basis of the 7-step falling stone matrix. As for breaking it, she was powerless. She could only leave it to Yao Xiong and the others. Yao Xiong's eyes flashed, but he smiled at Zhuowen and said, "Brother Zhuo, why don't you give it a try?" The king's spirit and the ghost curse lady looked at Zhuowen mockingly. From the beginning until now, Zhuowen had not been of much help, and Zhuowen had not been the main force in figuring out the path. Zhuowen's eyes were calm. He knew that since he was already here, he could not do nothing. If he did, he would be excluded from the team. He had to enter the Luo God Palace ruins. Once he entered, he would be like a fish in water. After all, he still had another incomplete map with him, which recorded the path inside the Luo God Palace ruins. Once he entered the Luo God Palace ruins, Jun planned to find an opportunity to part ways with the 3 of them. I have only reached the virtual sky 3rd step. Brother Yao, do you really trust me that much? Zhuowen asked calmly. Yao Xiong did not take it seriously. He said, Brother Zhuo, you may not know this, but the 7-step falling stone matrix does not only test one's cultivation, but also the strength of one's body. Brother Zhuo, I remember that you have a doppelganger. That doppelganger should be a demonic cultivator with an extremely strong body. If you have the help of that doppelganger, breaking the 7-step falling stone matrix will not be difficult. A cold light flashed in Zhuowen's eyes. It seemed that when he killed Lu Wuqi, Yao Xiong had arrived at the scene very early and had seen the scene of the black-clothed Zhuowen killing Lu Wuqi. King's spirit and ghost curse lady were surprised. They did not expect Zhuowen to have another body. Although it was not rare for cultivators to create clones, the clones required a great deal of resources to nurture. In other words, if you have a clone, then not only do you have to split your attention to nurture the clone, but you also have to use a portion of your resources to nurture the clone. After all, if the doppelganger was not strong enough, it would not be of any help to the main body. It would be better to use all the resources on the main body to improve the main body's cultivation as much as possible. With Yao Xiong exposing his clone, Zhuowen could do nothing about it. He could only wave his sleeve and find the black-robed Zhuowen, who was surging with demonic qi. True God, 2 disasters? Ghost curse lady raised her eyebrows. She could feel the fire aura on the demonic cultivator. She sneered in her heart and said, How strong can this trash's body be? I'm afraid he can't even take a step forward in the 7-step rockfall matrix. Thump. Unfortunately, as soon as Ghost Curse Lady finished speaking, the black-robed Zhuowen took a step forward and landed firmly on the first step of the 7-step rockfall matrix. Ghost Curse Lady's face stiffened as if she had eaten Chinese medicine. She did not dare to say anything. Humph. Even if he takes the first step of the 7-step rockfall matrix, how many steps can a true God 2 disasters take? Let alone break the matrix, Ghost Curse Lady snorted coldly and whispered. Yao Xiong and King's Spirit squinted their eyes. Their vision was much higher than Ghost Curse Lady's. They did feel the fire aura on the black-robed Zhuowen, but they also felt the terrifying power of thunder on the black-robed Zhuowen. The power of the thunder was far stronger than the thunder disaster of a true God 1 disaster. It's true God extreme thunder. This guy is really something. I'm afraid this doppelganger is even stronger than his original body, King's Spirit whispered to Yao Xiong. Yao Xiong smirked and replied, So what? Even if it's true God extreme thunder, he's no match for you. In the end, he's just a pushover in our hands. The King's Spirit nodded nonchalantly. At that moment, the black-clothed Zhuowen silently stood at the position of the first step. The instant he took the first step, he felt a pressure pressing down on him from all directions. In particular, the pressure in front of him was even more terrifying. Fortunately, the black-robed Zhuowen's body was much stronger than a normal cultivator's, so he was not afraid of the pressure. Thump, thump, thump. The black-robed Zhuowen took 3 steps forward slowly. The pressure condensed from the 3 steps was like a terrifying whirlwind, sweeping Zhuowen's body. Zhuowen could feel that the pressure had reached an unbelievable level. The resistance in front of him was like a storm, like thousands of mountains, preventing him from moving forward. With every step he took, the pressure would multiply. If this continued, it would be more difficult to move forward. If it was an ordinary cultivator's body, it would be difficult for him to last until the fifth step. His body would collapse inch by inch. However, the black-robed Juan was different. He had the body of Devour, a powerful race in the starry sky. The pressure was indeed terrifying, but it was not enough to stop him from moving forward. Taking a deep breath, Juan continued to step forward. He took 2 consecutive steps and arrived at the 5th step. The instant the 5th step landed, the oppressive might in the area reached a terrifying level that could shake heaven and earth. It was as if the invisible pressure under Juan's feet had turned into ferocious hands, entangling Juan's feet and dragging him deep into the ground. At this moment, under the terrifying pressure, Juan was like a lonely boat in the sea. Under the monstrous waves, he could sink into the sea at any time. At this moment, the ghost curse lady frowned and lowered her head, muttering to herself, "The array has changed at the 5th step. The person who set up the array is really insidious." Although Lady Ghost Curse said so, her lips curled into a gloating smile. As far as she was concerned, being able to make Juan suffer was absolutely pleasing to the eye. After all, ever since she met Juan, everything went wrong for her. Now that she could see Juan suffer, she was more than happy. Yao Xiong and Di Ling's eyes were calm and even cold. It was impossible to tell what they were thinking. Juan took a deep breath and took the 6th step. However, the moment the 6th step landed, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His body was on the verge of collapse, but he still managed to stand on the 6th step. Yao Xiong sneered in his heart. He originally thought that Juan was smarter than most people and knew how to make choices. Now, he realized that this person was still a little reckless and impulsive. He hadn't even entered the Luotian Palace ruins yet, but he was already so desperate to break through the 7-step rockfall matrix, and he didn't care about the consequences. Yao Xiong was sure that even if this kid broke the 7-step rockfall formation at that time, this clone would probably be heavily injured, and this kid would surely lose a sharp trump card. The moment he took the 6th step, the black-clothed Juan didn't stop at all and took another step. The moment he took the 7th step, the black-clothed Juan's body emitted a dense popping sound. It was as if all the bones in his body were being crushed under the terrifying pressure. Around the black-clothed Juan's body, a large amount of blood mist spewed out. The demonic aura surrounding the black-clothed Juan's body was dyed red by the blood mist. It looked very strange. The black-clothed Juan stopped at the 7th step. As for the real Juan, he looked at Yao Xiong and said in a low voice, "Brother Yao, my clone has suffered heavy losses this time." Yao Xiong's eyes flickered. He patted Juan's shoulder and said gratefully, "Thank you, Brother Juan, for your selfless contribution. How about this? After we enter the Luotian Palace ruins, you can have the first pick of the items we find. How about that?" Juan shook his head and said, "Yao Xiong, I'm afraid this isn't enough. After all, I've sacrificed a lot this time." Yao Xiong's eyes were dark, but he still smiled and said, "Take this." As he spoke, Yao Xiong handed Juan a jade-colored elixir. This elixir flickered with dense light patterns and looked very strange. However, Juan felt a strong medicinal power from this elixir that surprised him. This is the Holy Seal elixir. This elixir can permanently raise cultivators below the 5th step of the Void Sky realm by a small realm. Moreover, there are almost no side effects, Yao Xiong said. Juan's eyes narrowed and he accepted the Holy Seal elixir without hesitation. He cupped his hands at Yao Xiong and said, "Thank you, Brother Yao. There's only 1 step left. The rest is up to you, Brother Juan." Yao Xiong looked meaningfully at Juan's real body. Then, his gaze fell on the black-clothed Juan, who was on the 7th step. After receiving benefits from Yao Xiong, the black-clothed Juan hesitated for a moment. Then, he quickly raised his right foot and took the 8th step. The moment the 8th step landed, the surrounding mountains suddenly rumbled and trembled violently. Many huge rocks fell from the mountains, alerting the martyrs hidden around the canyon. At this moment, the 7-step rockfall array completely collapsed. Pucci. The moment the array collapsed, the black-clothed Zhuowen's face turned pale and he was sent flying. The eyes of Zhuowen's real body flickered. He immediately took a step forward, stretched out his right hand, and accurately pressed against the black-clothed Zhuowen's back, completely stopping him from flying backwards. "Brother Zhuowen, is your avatar okay?" Yao Xiong immediately stepped forward and placed his right hand on the black-clothed Zhuowen's shoulder. A secret divine sense quickly probed from Yao Xiong's palm into the black-clothed Zhuowen's body. It traveled all over his body before he quietly withdrew it. After confirming that the black-clothed Zhuowen was indeed seriously injured, Yao Xiong was relieved. He knew that this avatar was not fake. However, the coldness in Zhuowen's eyes was biting cold. Although Yao Xiong did it very secretly, his divine sense was not to be trifled with. The moment Yao Xiong's divine sense probed the black-clothed Zhuowen, he noticed it, but he did not act. So. Suddenly, the valley behind the mountain range completely collapsed at this moment. Then, more than 10 figures flew out from the valley. The moment Yuan saw these figures, his scalp went numb. This was because these figures were none other than the hairless martyrs whose lower bodies were transparent. "Let's go!" Yao Xiong and Di Ling's faces darkened. They quickly went into the tunnel in front of them, followed by the ghost curse lady. Chapter 2084. 7 poison puppets. The leader of the dozen or so martyrs had a broken sword stuck in his left chest. Only the tip of the broken sword was left. The surface of the broken sword was rusty and ordinary. The moment Yuan saw the broken sword, his pupils shrank to the size of needles, and his heart thumped wildly. Wasn't this broken sword the first half of the broken sword he had obtained from the ancient sword tomb? Zhuowen pondered for a moment and quickly made a decision. Zhuowen immediately shattered 300 divine soul star systems. Then, his divine sense instantly increased by countless times. His terrifying divine sense transformed into a gigantic hand that shot out and grabbed the broken sword in front of the martyr's chest. Puchi. Zhuowen pulled out the broken sword without hesitation. The martyrs stared at Zhuowen. Under the gazes of so many double martyrs, Zhuowen felt dizzy, as if he would collapse at any moment. However, Zhuowen made a prompt decision to consume the heavenly domain star essence, which instantly healed his damaged divine soul and shattered his divine soul galaxy once again, allowing him to recover from his confused state. Grabbing the broken sword, Zhuowen took a step forward and entered the tunnel. After Zhuowen's figure disappeared into the passageway, the martyrs arrived one after another. However, they seemed to have some kind of taboo. They lingered outside the passageway, not daring to enter. Zhuowen sped through the pitch-black tunnel for a long time until he could no longer hear the footsteps of the martyr behind him. Only then did he stop. Only then did Zhuowen start to look around. This was still a passageway, but Zhuowen's divine sense probed out first. He discovered that there was a huge stone room not far from the passageway. In the stone room, he also discovered Yao Xiong and the other two. They continued forward, and as soon as they entered the stone chamber, they immediately attracted the attention of Yao Xiong and the others. "Brother Zhuo, why are you so slow? Did something happen to you outside just now?" Yao Xiong turned to look at Zhuowen and asked. Zhuowen smiled and said, "It was the first time I saw so many martyrs. I was stunned for a moment, so I came in late." "I see." Yao Xiong took a deep look at Zhuowen and did not continue to ask. At this moment, Zhuowen began to look around the stone room. The walls around the stone room were overgrown with weeds, indicating that this stone room was ancient. The stone room was not big. There were 3 rooms in total. The ground was messy, and many pills were scattered everywhere. However, most of these pills were already in the windflower realm and would scatter with a single touch. They were completely unusable. As I said just now, Brother Zhuo contributed a lot to deciphering the 7-step rockfall formation, so we must let Brother Zhuo choose first. This stone room is quite big. Perhaps there is something good. The 3 of us don't need to touch it. Let Brother Zhuo search by himself. Whatever he finds will belong to Brother Zhuo. The 3 of us cannot take anything. Yao Xiong suddenly said this righteously, but Zhuowen's heart sank. The stone room in front of them was the entrance. What good things could there be? Yao Xiong had purposely said this because he wanted to use the things in the stone room to casually dismiss Zhouwen. Moreover, Zhouwen had the other half of the map fragment. He knew that the real good things were in the depths of the Luo God Palace ruins, and not in this stone room. It was already good enough that he could find some divine medicine and pills in this stone room. It was wishful thinking to want better things. What? Is Zhouwen not satisfied? If you are not satisfied... Before Yao Xiong could finish, he was interrupted by Zhouwen. Zhouwen appreciates Brother Yao's good intentions. How can I not be satisfied? It's just that my clone is seriously injured and my strength has been greatly reduced. I'm afraid that it will be extremely disadvantageous for me to continue. Therefore, I plan to recuperate in this stone room for a while, Zhouwen said. Yao Xiong frowned slightly. He looked deeply at Zhouwen and nodded. That's good. Brother Zhou has put in a lot of effort this time. You do need to recuperate for a while. With that, Yao Xiong waved his sleeve. A black gas condensed into a human figure in front of him. It was an expressionless man in black. His skin was a strange greenish-black color, as if he had been poisoned. This is the 7 poisons puppet that I personally refined. The poison in its body is terrifying and its toxicity is unparalleled. If an ordinary cultivator of the Void Sky 5th stage is not careful, they may be poisoned and seriously injured. I'll leave this puppet to you, Brother Zhou. If you encounter any danger, this puppet can definitely help you, Yao Xiong said with a smile. Zhouwen narrowed his eyes. However, he was laughing coldly in his heart. It seemed that Yao Xiong was worried about him. He had actually placed such a puppet beside him to keep an eye on him. Thank you, Brother Yao, Zhouwen said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Yao Xiong waved his hand and said hypocritically, Brother Zhou, what are you saying? We are companions now. Naturally, we should help each other. Only in this way can we go far in this dangerous Luo God Palace ruins, isn't that right? Now, the 3 of us will go ahead to explore. When the time comes, we will set up markings. When Brother Zhou is done recuperating, just follow the markings and follow. Zhouwen did not say anything. Instead, he nodded. Yao Xiong instructed again. The 3 of them left the stone room and began to explore the depths of the Luo God Palace ruins. After the 3 of them left, the puppet stared at Zhouwen. Its tyrannical divine sense locked onto Zhouwen tightly as if it was looking at a prisoner. The black-robed Zhouwen sat cross-legged on the spot and began to pretend to recuperate. Meanwhile, Zhouwen's original body began to search the 3 stone rooms. He carefully searched the first 2 stone rooms, but didn't find anything of value. When he entered the 3rd stone room, it was empty. There was only a praying mat stained with blood. Zhouwen carefully examined the praying mat. He slowly probed it with his divine sense and discovered that there was something mysterious about it. He took off the praying mat and discovered that there was a hole underneath it. He probed it with his divine sense and found a skeleton sitting cross-legged at the end of the hole. Zhouwen looked up and down at the skeleton. Under the skeleton's pelvis, he found a half-empty elixir. Zhouwen picked up the half-empty elixir and looked it up and down. He narrowed his eyes. He discovered that there were faint light patterns on the surface of the elixir. It looked 90% similar to the Saint Forbidden Divine Pill that Yao Xiong had given him. Zhouwen took out the Saint Forbidden Divine Pill and compared it with the half-empty elixir. Indeed, in terms of patterns, the 2 elixirs were almost identical. Without a doubt, this half-empty elixir was definitely the Saint Forbidden Divine Pill. Zhouwen's gaze landed on the skeleton again. He discovered that the skeleton was completely black and was faintly surrounded by black gas. Furthermore, Zhouwen could sense the black gas with a sniff. It was probably a powerful and terrifying poisonous gas. Zhouwen looked at the skeleton and played with the Saint Forbidden Divine Pill in his hand. The coldness in his eyes intensified. He was certain that there was something wrong with the Saint Forbidden Divine Pill. Although he did not discover any poison in the Holy Forbidden Divine Pill, he knew that the skeleton was an example. He would not be fooled because of this. Of course, Zhouwen did not need to think to guess why the skeleton was sitting in the stone chamber and why it happened to have consumed the Saint Forbidden Divine Pill. Yao Xiong must have entered the Luotian Palace ruins more than once. Yao Xiong knew a lot more than he did. He knew about the martyrs in the canyon and the interior of the Luotian palace ruins. Perhaps Yao Xiong had long known that one person needed to be assimilated into a martyr to be allowed to pass through the canyon. Luo Suo had become a pitiful sacrifice in Yao Xiong's plan. As for Lady Ghost Curse, her array formation skills were extremely high. Yao Xiong had only invited her to open a path for them. As for Jun, what did Yao Xiong see in him? Divine Soul, Jun guessed the answer. During the battle with Lu Wuqi, Yao Xiong had also sensed that Zhuowen's divine soul was different. That was why he had invited him to enter the Luotian palace ruins. In other words, there had to be something in the Luotian palace ruins that required a powerful divine soul to decipher. However, Zhuan felt that something was amiss. If Yao Xiong really needed Zhuan, why would he give him the Saint Forbidden Divine Pill? The Saint Forbidden Divine Pill was suspected to be poison. Wasn't Yao Xiong afraid that Zhuan would be poisoned to death like the skeleton in front of him after consuming the Saint Forbidden Divine Pill? Saint Forbidden Divine Pill. Consume it? You can advance by a small realm. A stuttering voice came from the door of the stone chamber. Zhuan turned to look at the puppet with a sneer on his face. Now he knew why the owner of the skeleton had died of poison. The Saint Forbidden Divine Pill was indeed not poison. However, there should be something in it that was related to the 7 poison puppets' poison. Once he consumed the Saint Forbidden Divine Pill, he might be able to advance by a small realm. However, he would be restricted by the 7 poison puppets at the same time. At that time, the poison released by the 7 poison puppets might be able to kill Zhuan. He would be in so much pain that he would wish he was dead. If he did not want to die, he could only listen to the 7 poison puppets or the 7 poison puppets' master, Yao Xiong. Yao Xiong, you have a good idea. Chapter 2085. Luo God Stone statue. Green light burst out of the 7 poisons puppet's eyes. With a grin, it shook its arms, releasing a dense poisonous gas that instantly spread throughout the stone chamber. Jun calmly took out a bottle of Heavenly Domain Star Essence, poured it into his mouth, and held it in his mouth. The 7 poisons puppet's poisonous gas was really powerful. Not only did it cause terrible damage when it invaded the body, but it also had terrible corrosiveness when it touched the skin. If Jun didn't rely on the Heavenly Domain Star Essence, this poisonous gas would be really troublesome for him. But now that he had the Heavenly Domain Star Essence, Jun had no scruples in this poisonous gas. Bang! Sword Swimming Great Void was used. Sword light poured down like water, pouring down on the 7 poisons puppet. But the 7 poisons puppet was not easy to deal with. Its hands formed a series of seals, and green runes appeared on its arms. Bang! The 7 poisons puppet punched out with both fists at an extremely fast frequency, like cannonballs, endless and endless, blocking the terrible sword light. Just as the 7 poisons puppet was about to counterattack, a palm suddenly grabbed its head from behind. The palm of this hand contained terrifying black thunderbolts, and they crackled continuously. Boom! The black thunderbolts were so terrible that the 7 poisons puppet's head was directly blown off. But the black thunderbolts did not stop. The terrifying black thunderbolts invaded the 7 poisons puppet's body and began to wantonly destroy it. Boom! 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 The 7 poisons puppet's body trembled violently, and with a boom, it exploded into countless pieces. After the 7 poisons puppet collapsed, a figure shrouded in demonic fog slowly walked out from behind it. It was the black-clothed Zhuan. In Yao Xiong's impression, the black-clothed Zhuan was seriously injured and was no longer a threat, so he did not let the 7 poisons puppet guard against the black-clothed Zhuan. It was because the 7 poisons puppet did not guard against the black-clothed Zhuan that the black-clothed Zhuan successfully launched a sneak attack. The black-clothed Zhuan waved his sleeve and summoned a devouring vortex, which absorbed all the poisonous gas in the surroundings. Zhuan's true body slowly walked out of the poison gas. He glanced at the destroyed 7 poisons puppets and frowned, muttering to himself, "The 7 poisons puppets have been destroyed. That Yao Xiong will definitely sense it. I have to leave this place as soon as possible." As he spoke, Yun took out a jade slip from his spirit ring. This jade slip contained the route of the sun and moon grass that he had obtained from the crepe myrtle sect. The map recorded the route inside the Luotian Palace ruins. Although there were no specific markings, it was better for Juan to have this map than to blindly wander around the Luotian Palace ruins. After briefly skimming through the contents of the jade slip, Juan put away the black-clothed Zhuowen and allowed him to continue comprehending the thousand-sword rain in the spirit ring while he flew out of the stone room. Not long after Zhuowen left the stone chamber, 3 figures returned from outside the stone chamber. These 3 people were Yao Xiong and the other 2 people who had returned. Yao Xiong came to the broken 7 poisons puppet and silently looked at the puppet fragments under his feet. His face was as calm as still water, and no one could tell his true emotions. It seems that this Zhuowen did not know how to appreciate kindness. He actually attacked my 7 poisons puppet and destroyed it. You may know a person for a long time, but you cannot judge his true nature. After a long time, Yao Xiong sighed softly, and then his eyes burst with a cold, murderous intent. He continued, "If I find this boy, I will not let him off." The ghost curse lady's eyes flashed, and she saw a clue. But she was not stupid enough to say it out loud. Now that she was tied to Yao Xiong and the king's spirit, if she did not rely on these 2 people, she would not be able to get out. So, she had to rely on them. The place was overgrown with weeds, and the fog was faintly discernible. The scenery in the distance was faintly discernible. Juan sped along, passing through one valley after another. From time to time, he would stop and take out the jade slip to look at it for a moment, as if he was comparing the route. Not long after, he continued to move forward. After a while, Juan arrived outside a valley. At the very front of the valley, there was an extremely tall mountain range. At the top of the mountain range, clouds lingered, and the shadow of a building could be vaguely seen. Juan knew that this building was most likely the Luo God Palace of the past. This restriction. Is it the ghost curse lady's technique? Just as Juan was about to enter the valley, his gaze fell on the entrance of the valley, and he found some clues. The entrance of the valley was originally sealed by a restriction, but now it had been broken by someone. Juan was not unfamiliar with this method at all. It was the ghost curse lady's method of breaking the array. After all, Juan and the ghost curse lady had worked together to deduce the path to the Luo God Palace ruins. Juan knew the ghost curse lady's method of breaking arrays very well. Juan thought for a moment, then summoned several array discs with his right hand and set up a continuous trap and kill array. On top of the trap and kill array, Juan set up a shielding array to completely conceal the trap and kill array. Juan believed that with the ghost curse lady and Yao Xiong's arrogance, they would have already broken the restriction here. They would definitely not expect someone to set up a trap and kill array here. Although the trap and kill array could not kill Yao Xiong and the others, it could at least annoy them. After doing this, Juan turned into a shadow and disappeared from the valley. Not long after Juan left, Yao Xiong and the others arrived at the entrance of the valley again. That Juan is alone, and he doesn't have a map of the Luo God Palace ruins. He can only be a blind cat running into a dead mouse. There is nothing to be afraid of. Let's go inside the Luo God Palace ruins first. Yao Xiong stopped outside the valley and pointed his right hand at the top of the mountain range at the end of the valley. He continued, "At the top of the mountain, there is a huge building. That is the Luo God Palace ruins." The king's spirit and the ghost curse lady both looked in the direction Yao Xiong pointed, their eyes burning with passion. "Let's go in." The corners of Yao Xiong's mouth curled up as he stepped into the valley. However, the moment his right foot stepped into the valley, Yao Xiong had an ominous premonition. Bang, 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 bang. Suddenly, there was a series of explosions under his feet. The explosions grew louder and louder, and a terrifying killing force instantly enveloped Yao Xiong. The king's spirit and the ghost curse lady did not expect this to happen. The moment the explosions sounded, they quickly retreated, not caring about Yao Xiong. The explosions did not last long. They were annihilated by an even more terrifying force. Then, Yao Xiong walked out with a gloomy face. His face was green with anger. "Ghost curse lady, you have to give me an explanation. Didn't you say that the entrance to the valley has been completely broken? What is the situation now? Don't tell me you didn't see what happened to me just now." Yao Xiong looked at the innocent Ghost Curse lady furiously and shouted at the top of his lungs. Lady Ghost Curse was really frightened by this shout. She quickly explained, "I don't know what's going on either. I've clearly broken through the restrictions at the entrance. That's impossible." After saying that, the Ghost Curse lady walked to the entrance. She formed a seal with her hands and muttered something. Then she said in a deep voice, "Someone has set up a chain of trap and kill arrays here. They have also set up a shielding array outside the trap and kill arrays." Yao Xiong calmed down at this moment. His chest heaved up and down. Finally, he said in a deep voice, "You mean, someone else came here before us? That's impossible. We are the only ones who entered this place. There can't be outsiders." The king's spirit suddenly interrupted, "Brother Yao, did you forget about Zhuan? That little bastard's array skills are not bad." Yao Xiong frowned and pondered for a moment. Then he said in a deep voice, "Lady Ghost Curse, we have to be careful from now on. If Zhuan really runs ahead of us, he might set a trap for us." The Ghost Curse lady nodded. Then she suddenly wondered, "How did Zhuan get here? I remember that we took the wrong path several times before we finally arrived here. Maybe that kid is just lucky. Be careful from now on. If you can find Zhuan, capture him immediately. I still have some use for him," Yao Xiong said. Then the three of them entered the valley. However, the three of them were much more vigilant than before. If there was even the slightest movement, the three of them would be on guard. At this moment, at the end of the valley, the top of the tall mountain range was shrouded in fog. Zhuan stood in the hazy fog. His eyes fell on the huge group of buildings in front of him. Inside this group of buildings, there were countless palaces made of white marble. They looked many times more advanced than the palaces of mortal emperors. However, the building complex was now lifeless. Zhuan even discovered that most of the buildings were rather dilapidated, as if they were in ruins. In the center of this group of buildings, there was an incomparably huge stone statue. The original form of this stone sculpture was that of a woman. Moreover, it was a beautiful woman with outstanding looks. This woman's eyes were slightly open. She looked down at the earth and the world with disdain. Her charm was outstanding. It was as if the entire sky was in her eyes. It was not worth mentioning. Zhuan could tell at a glance that this was a very proud woman. She was also a very strong woman. For this woman's stone statue to be able to stand in the middle of the Luotian Palace ruins, she must be the founder of the Luotian Palace. Zhuan muttered in a low voice. He walked towards the Luotian Palace ruins that were vaguely shrouded in fog. Zhuan, who had a complete map of the Luotian Palace ruins, avoided many dangers along the way. He arrived in front of the Luotian Palace ruins without any obstructions. The sun and moon grass. I must find it in the Luotian Palace ruins. Chen Shui, you must wait for me, Zhuan said as his footsteps became firmer. Zhuan stopped in front of the gates of the Luotian Palace ruins. This was a huge mountain gate. It was made of sparkling celestial jade. The celestial fog that filled the air made people feel like they were in a fairyland. Chapter 2086. Duke Zhuowen looked at the buildings in front of him and frowned. After a moment of hesitation, he stepped onto the stone steps. To Zhuowen's surprise, there were no restrictions or pressure on the stone steps. They were just like ordinary steps. But the more normal they were, the stranger Zhuowen felt. Along the way, he had encountered many obstacles and difficulties, but the entrance to the Luo God Palace ruins was as smooth as a mountain. I have to be more careful, Zhuan muttered to himself as he quickened his pace. At the same time, he took out the Jade Scroll and began to compare the route. According to the Jade Scroll, the interior of the Luo God Palace ruins was like a maze. It was extremely complicated. Just looking at the map gave Zhuowen a headache, let alone experiencing it himself. The Luo God Palace was divided into 3 areas. According to the Jade Scroll, each area had its own corresponding checkpoint and danger. If one was not careful, it was easy to die inside. Zhuan stepped onto the stone steps and arrived at the first area of the Luo God Palace. It was a huge open space. Around the open space were scattered ruins and building debris. It was like a ruin. Zhuan muttered to himself, but he did not continue forward. Instead, he looked around and noticed a ruin on the left. Zhuan rushed to the ruin and moved the big rock at the top. He went in and sealed the big rock again. After hiding in the ruins, Zhuan set up a concealment formation. At the same time, his extremely enormous soul even gave birth to a terrifyingly powerful divine sense that enveloped the surroundings, faking the aura to be exactly the same as the surroundings. When he followed Yao Xiong and the others in, Zhuan could clearly feel that Yao Xiong and the king's spirit must have been here several times. They must have been inside the Luo God Palace ruins. He came to this conclusion because of his observation and the calmness of the Luo God Palace ruins. Just now, when Zhuan had stepped onto the steps, he had sensed that something was wrong. This was because he had used his powerful divine sense to investigate the stone steps. Originally, there was a powerful restriction on the stone steps, but it had been broken by someone. Zhuan guessed that it was Yao Xiong and the king's spirit who had broken the restriction. If the two of them had been there before, they must have been familiar with the place. If Zhuan went in first, he'd have to face Yao Xiong and the king's spirit. Zhuan was strong, but against a 7th-level virtual sky elite like King's Spirit, it was still difficult. On the other hand, Yao Xiong's schemes were as deep as the sea. Although it was only 6 steps void sky, Zhuan could feel that Yao Xiong was definitely not as simple as he seemed on the surface. After all, he had observed the King's Spirit's attitude towards Yao Xiong when they were traveling together. Luo Suo was also a virtual sky 6 steps elite, but in the eyes of the King's Spirits, he was just trash. But the King's Spirit's attitude towards Yao Xiong was different. Zhuan could see that the King's Spirit treated Yao Xiong as an equal. It didn't look down on Yao Xiong, and it even seemed to be afraid of him. From this, it could be seen that Yao Xiong was not simple. Now, Zhuan had completely fallen out with these people. Once they met, they would fight to the death. Zhuan wasn't ready to face Yao Xiong and the King's Spirit head-on, so it would be best if he didn't encounter them. Zhuan didn't know what dangers lurked inside the Luo God Palace, so he planned to wait and see what Yao Xiong and the King's Spirit were up to. At this time, Yao Xiong, the King's Spirit, and the Ghost Curse Lady had arrived outside the Luo God Palace ruins. Along the way, we haven't encountered any trap arrays. It seems that Zhuan has taken the wrong route, the Ghost Curse Lady said coldly. Yao Xiong laughed coldly and said, "The route here is very complicated. If you don't have a map or have explored it before, it won't be easy to find the right way." The King's Spirit nodded and said, "Then let's put Zhuan aside for now. Let's enter the Luo God Palace first." The Ghost Curse Lady suddenly said, "I heard that the reason the Luo God reached the 9 steps void sky was because he was lucky enough to obtain the blood of heaven. Because of that, he was favored by the rules of the universe. Is that true?" Yao Xiong narrowed his eyes and looked at the Ghost Curse Lady. He smiled and said, "That's right. Although the blood of heaven is a legend, it is not without evidence. Why is it that there are almost no cultivators who have reached the 9 steps void sky? Most of them stop at the 8 steps void sky? The main reason is that the rules of the universe don't recognize cultivators. After all, once you understand life and death, you are basically on the same level as the rules of the universe. As long as the universe doesn't die, cultivators who understand life and death won't die unless they are destroyed by external forces. However, things are different with the blood of heaven. The blood of heaven is illusory. It is said that the blood of heaven is formed by the rules of the universe. If you absorb the blood of heaven, you will have the potential to reach the 9 steps void sky." The King's Spirit's eyes were burning. He continued, "The Luo God Palace has many secrets. If we can uncover them, even if we don't have the blood of heaven, with the power of the Luo God Palace, we will benefit a lot." The Ghost Curse Lady nodded, but her heart was beating fast. The blood of heaven, understanding life and death, which cultivator wouldn't want it? Then why did Lord Brahma suppress the Luo God? And is the Luo God dead or alive? The Ghost Curse Lady asked again. Yao Xiong shook his head and said, "This is a mystery. I only know that the Luo God Palace is in ruins. The Luo God is said to be dead. Lord Brahma never interfered with the affairs of the Far West. He never even set foot in the Far West. As for the truth, the records in the ancient books are vague. There is no reasonable explanation. The king's spirit suddenly said, "There is nothing to say. Whether the Luo God Palace has the blood of heaven or not, we will know when we go in. As for the truth, it is a mystery. There is no need to investigate. Brother D is right. Let's go in first," Yao Xiong said with a smile. The three of them stepped onto the stone steps and quickly entered the Luo God Palace. They came to the open space where Zhuan had been before. The Luoshan Palace ruins are divided into 3 areas. Back then, Brother D and I explored it several times, but we only entered the first 2 areas. The third area, which is the core area of the Luoshan Palace ruins, is very difficult to enter. Yao Xiong pointed to the huge Luo God stone statue in front of them and continued, "The Luo God stone statue is located in the core area. The real good things are in this area. However, we have to be careful in the first 2 areas. When Brother D and I entered these 2 areas, we encountered a lot of trouble." Yao Xiong reminded them again. The 3 of them continued to go deeper and soon disappeared at the end of the open space. When Yao Xiong and the other 2 disappeared into the open space, Zhuan slowly walked out of the ruins. His eyes flashed as he looked ahead and frowned. After hesitating for a moment, he followed. After passing through the open space, they came to a broken temple. The temple was very large, covering tens of thousands of miles. If it had been complete, it would have been a shocking building. Now it was just a pile of ruins. The temple was still eerily quiet. There was nothing useful, not to mention restrictions or things. There were only ruins around. Zhuan continued to move forward. He was getting closer and closer to the Luo God stone statue, but the surroundings were still quiet. Suddenly, the movement in front of him attracted Zhuan. He came to the corner, poked his head out and looked over. What entered his eyes was an incomparably huge door. The door was very tall. It was 500 feet tall and sat outside the Luo God stone statue. And inside the door, there was a 7-colored fog lingering around. The rainbow-colored fog obscured everything in the core area. Only the stone statue of the Luo God, which pierced through the clouds, stood out from the rest and could be seen clearly. In front of the door, Yao Xiong, the king's spirit, and the ghost curse lady stood quietly. The ghost curse lady and Yao Xiong were knocking on the door. It seemed that they were trying to open the restrictions on the door. The king's spirit blasted out a series of spells, trying to break the door. Unfortunately, the king's spirit's attacks were as soft as cotton candy when they landed on the door. This is the core area. The restrictions on the door are too scary. My attacks are useless. The king's spirit took a few steps back and looked very serious. Yao Xiong looked at the king's spirit and smiled bitterly. "Brother D, don't waste your energy. Didn't you try last time? The restrictions on the door can't be broken with brute force." The king's spirit snorted but did not answer. The ghost curse lady suddenly looked happy and said, "I have a way to break it, but I need the 2 of you to help me." Then, the 3 of them discussed and worked together to open the restriction on the door. Then, the 3 of them entered the door. Zhuan frowned. His eyes flashed and he decided to go and have a look. He rushed to the door and looked up and down. Suddenly, his face changed. He found that the restriction on the door in front of him was not broken at all. How did the ghost curse lady and her companions get in? "Oh no, I've been tricked," Zhuan thought to himself. He immediately retreated. Unfortunately, an invisible ripple formed behind him and blocked his retreat. Only then did Zhuan discover that a very powerful confinement-killing array had appeared around him at who knows when. Judging from the aura of the trap and kill array, it was a level 7 trap and kill array. With Zhuan's current strength, it would take him a lot of effort to break this trap and kill array. However, he knew that since someone had set up a trap and kill array here, they were waiting for him to take the bait. If he guessed correctly, the person who set up the trap and kill array was not far away. As expected, the moment Zhuan was trapped in the trap and kill array, footsteps sounded. Chapter 2087. Formless Grand Array Zhuowen's gaze was gloomy as he looked at Yao Xiong, who walked out of the door. He said in a low voice, "Camouflage? The three of you didn't break the restriction on this door at all?" The corners of Yao Xiong's mouth curled slightly. He said, "If we didn't set up a camouflage, would you be so easily fooled? Following behind us for so long, you must be tired, right? How did you discover me?" Zhuowen's brows knitted slightly. He remembered that he was already careful enough, but he was still discovered by Yao Xiong and the rest. He really could not understand. Yao Xiong smiled and said, "I can recognize the aura on the 7 poisons puppets. Although you destroyed the 7 poisons puppets, you were also contaminated by the poison gas on their bodies. Although I don't know how you resisted the poison gas of the 7 poisons puppets, this poison gas is colorless and odorless. It takes a very long time to completely disperse. When you were hiding in the ruins, I already detected you. It's just that I didn't point it out." Zhuon secretly cursed this Yao Xiong for being cunning in his heart. He actually did something to the 7 poisons puppets. It was truly hateful to the extreme. When Zhuon still wanted to speak, Yao Xiong grinned hideously and said, "Brother Zhuon, you don't need to stall for time anymore. Although your formation's Dao level is not bad, wanting to break this 7th level confinement killing array is not something that can be done in a short time." Zhuon was silent, but he did not relax his vigilance in the slightest. Although he was currently trapped inside the confinement killing array, if this Yao Xiong wanted to capture him, then he had to undo the confinement killing array first. Once Yao Xiong undid the confinement killing array, that would be the opportunity for Zhuon to leave. Except, what made Zhuon surprised was that Yao Xiong did not undo the confinement killing array. Instead, he took out a brocade box from his bosom. Opening the brocade box, an orange bead lay quietly inside. This bead looked simple and unremarkable, without too many characteristics. But the instant Zhuon saw this bead, his pupils shrank. Soul-sealing bead? Zhuowen's expression was ugly. The so-called soul-imprisoning pearl was a kind of pearl that could imprison the divine soul. This kind of bead had an absolute suppressive effect on a cultivator's soul. Once this spirit-sealing bead was used on a cultivator, that cultivator's soul would definitely be imprisoned, making it difficult for them to even release their spiritual sense. Divine sense was extremely important to a cultivator. If a cultivator was unable to release their divine sense, their combat strength would be greatly affected. "Your eyesight is not bad." Yao Xiong smiled and gave Di Ling a look. He threw the soul-imprisoning pearl to Di Ling. The king's spirit took the forbidden soul orb and grinned. He grabbed the orb with his right hand, infused it with God power, and threw it into the trap array. As soon as the soul-imprisoning pearl entered the trap and kill array, it emitted a terrifying orange light. This light seemed to have no destructive power, but it silently drilled into Zhuowen's glabella and set up all kinds of restraining forces in Zhuowen's spiritual space. Although Zhuowen's divine soul was strong enough, this soul-imprisoning pearl was a strange object that specialized in restraining divine souls. Even though Zhuon tried his best to resist, he could not stop his divine soul from being sealed. Yao Xiong frowned and looked at Zhuon, who was still struggling. He murmured in a low voice, "The strength of this kid's divine soul is beyond my expectations." Generally speaking, as soon as the soul-imprisoning pearl is used, most cultivators' divine souls would be sealed immediately, but this kid is still able to hold on. Thinking of this, Yao Xiong threw out another soul-imprisoning pearl with his right hand. This time, the restraining force around Zhuon became even more terrifying. Even though the 300 divine soul galaxies in his spiritual space were running at the same time, it was still useless. He could only watch as his spiritual space was completely sealed, as if time had stopped. However, the moment Zhuowen's divine soul was completely sealed, he opened his spirit ring, took out a bottle of heavenly domain star essence, and hid it in his sleeve. After Zhuowen's divine soul was sealed by 2 soul-imprisoning pearls, the ghost curse lady released the trap and kill array. Yao Xiong walked slowly to Zhuon and said with a smile, "Brother Zhuo, I'm sorry. Who asked you to kill my 7 poison puppets? And you secretly followed us. I'm afraid you don't have good intentions, do you?" Zhuon took a few steps back and stared coldly at Yao Xiong. he said in a low voice. Brother Yao, you misunderstood. I didn't kill the 7 poison puppets. What do you mean by attacking me now? And the Luotian palace is in danger. This is not the time for internal strife. I think we should work together to overcome this crisis. The smile on Yao Xiong's face widened. He said with a smile, Brother Zhua, now I'm giving you a chance to redeem yourself. As long as you do it, I'll write off what happened before. How about it? Zhuowen's heart sank. He had a bad feeling, but the situation was pressing. He knew that no matter what condition Yao Xiong put forward, he had to agree. Although the 2 soul imprisoning pearls had completely sealed his divine soul was very strong. Now, he was operating the celestial star meditation diagram with all his strength, slowly breaking the power of the soul imprisoning pearls. Of course, now that Yao Xiong was in front of him, Zhuan didn't try to break it openly. If Yao Xiong found out, it would be terrible. What do you want me to do? Zhuan asked warily. Yao Xiong smiled and said, It's very simple. Do you see the door in front of you? This door is the door to the core area of the Luotian palace. The restriction inside is very strong. Even if the 3 of us work together, we can't break it. However, there's a flaw in the restriction on the door, and the key to opening the door is in that flaw. As long as you enter that flaw and obtain the key, we'll write off all past grievances. How about it? Zhuowen's heart sank. Although Yao Xiong made it sound easy, he knew that the so-called flaw in the door was definitely very dangerous. This restriction was so terrifying. If he went deep into the restriction, wasn't that just courting death? Yao Xiong saw Zhuan hesitate and smiled again. If Brother Zhua is unwilling, I won't force you. However, I'll go. Zhuan said calmly. Although Yao Xiong was polite to him now, he knew that this guy was very shrewd. Even if he didn't agree, he would probably forcefully throw him into the restriction of the door. Brother Zhua is really straightforward. In that case, I'll have to trouble Brother Zhua. Yao Xiong laughed. Can I take away the soul imprisoning pearl before going in? Zhuan asked. Yao Xiong sneered. Brother Zhua, don't mention it. I'll take out the key for you. Didn't I say just now? There's no danger inside the restriction. It doesn't matter whether you take the soul imprisoning pearl or not. Zhuan cursed in his heart. He knew that Yao Xiong was pushing him into the fire pit. However, he had no choice. Now that he was under the control of others, he could only do as Yao Xiong said. Of course, Zhuan couldn't figure out what Yao Xiong was planning. Yao Xiong said to Lady Ghost Curse, Lady Ghost Curse, I'll leave the rest to you. Find the flaw in the restriction so that Brother Zhua can enter. Lady Ghost Curse looked at Zhuan sympathetically and sighed in her heart. There was indeed a flaw in the door, but Lady Ghost Curse wasn't sure if it was safe inside. She guessed that it was very dangerous. Lady Ghost Curse knew that Yao Xiong was talking nonsense when he said that it was absolutely safe inside. Lady Ghost Curse floated in front of the door and made a gesture with both hands. Then, a stream of black gas gushed out from her 5 fingers and merged into the door. In a short while, the door was dyed black. Lady Ghost Curse closed her eyes and carefully sensed the aura. Suddenly, she opened her eyes, which were shining. The black gas that was attached to the door all flowed into the upper right side of the door. Then, Lady Ghost Curse pointed with both hands and shot out several formation discs at the upper right side of the door where the black gas gathered. Suddenly, the black gas began to swirl and eventually turned into a black vortex entrance. Yao Xiong smiled and looked at Zhuan, whose face was gloomy, and said, Brother Zhua, go in. Remember to find the key inside. Whether the door can be opened or not depends on you. Yao Xiong released a terrifying aura as he spoke. He was on guard, guarding against Zhuowen's resistance and escape at any time. However, to his surprise, Zhun only hesitated for a moment and obediently went to the vortex entrance. Brother Yao, I hope you'll keep your word, Zhun said and stepped into the vortex. Yao Xiong heaved a sigh of relief and sneered at the same time. Boom! Zhuowen suddenly punched out, and the weak point of the whirlpool was directly smashed into smithereens. Zhuowen then took a step with his right foot and directly entered the whirlpool. However, when Zhuan completely entered, The vortex could not bear the burden and collapsed completely. "The bastard? Does he know something?" Yao Xiong's expression changed drastically. His eyes were extremely gloomy. The restriction on the door of the core area was called the phaseless formation. This formation would always have a flaw on the surface of the restriction. Moreover, this flaw was real. Cultivators could enter the flaw and explore it. Once the exploration was successful, they would be able to enter the core area through the phaseless formation. This phaseless formation was extremely rare. Even the people in the outside world who knew about it did not know about it. Yao Xiong had only learned about the existence of this phaseless formation after consulting many ancient books. Given Yao Xiong's character, it was naturally impossible for him to take the lead and enter the flaw to explore. After all, this phaseless formation was not a good place. Even he was in danger of dying. As for Zhuan, he was just a test subject that Yao Xiong planned to put in. He knew very well that as long as Zhuan was not dead, this phaseless formation was not very dangerous. However, if he was dead, Yao Xiong would still not take the risk. Instead, he would let the ghost curse lady go in and explore again. He would not enter until he had completely confirmed the situation inside the phaseless formation. However, this formless grand array had a flaw. Once a cultivator found a flaw in it, the flaw in the formless grand array would completely disappear. If he wanted to find the flaw again, he would have to wait for the phaseless formation to completely recover. Chapter 2088. The Defiant. Inside the formless array, all kinds of weapons appeared and blasted toward Zhuan. Moreover, Zhuan discovered that these weapons were basically targeting his soul and not his physical body. Moreover, these attacks were extremely powerful and terrifying. When used on his soul, it was enough to completely annihilate it. If an ordinary cultivator fell into this formless array, he would probably be killed immediately. Bang! Zhuan endured the severe pain in his spirit and was pleasantly surprised to find that cracks had appeared on the soul trapping pearl suspended in his spiritual space under the attack of the formless array. Let's break the soul trapping pearl in one go. Zhuan's eyes showed a determined look. More than 300 divine soul galaxies operated at the same time. His spiritual consciousness turned into a hurricane and blasted on the soul trapping pearl. Suddenly, the cracks on the surface of the soul trapping pearl became bigger and bigger, and eventually spread throughout the entire soul trapping pearl. Crack! With a crisp sound, the soul trapping pearl was completely broken, and Zhuan's spirit was completely liberated. At the same time, the terrifying attack of the formless array poured into Zhuan's spiritual space and began to destroy it unscrupulously. Zhuan sat in the formless array and endured the terrifying attack of the formless array. He only felt a splitting headache, as if his whole head was about to explode. At this moment, more than 300 divine soul galaxies suspended in Zhuan's spiritual space were exploding one by one. The tearing force produced by the exploding galaxies made Zhuan involuntarily groan in pain. After the divine soul galaxies exploded, Zhuan did not hesitate to take out the heavenly starry sky essence that he had prepared long ago from his sleeve. He drank a drop, then took another sip and held it in his mouth. With the heavenly starry sky essence, Zhuan's spirit was restored to its peak, and he began to operate the stars meditation diagram to resist the attack of the formless array with his spirit. Gradually, Zhuan found that as he continued to resist the attack of the formless array with his spirit was invisibly strengthening, and the number of divine soul galaxies also showed signs of increasing. Upon discovering this, Zhuan was overjoyed. Although the formless array's attack on the divine soul was exceptionally terrifying, and every time he used it, his divine soul would be smashed into smithereens. However, Zhuan had a treasure like the heavenly domain starry sky essence, so he was not afraid at all. Every time his divine soul could not withstand an attack, he would immediately take the heavenly domain starry sky essence to restore his damaged divine soul to its peak. Going back and forth like this, Zhuan's divine soul constellation started to increase. Days passed, and Zhuan had been sitting cross-legged in the formless array for a total of 5 years. In these 5 years, Zhuan had basically used his divine soul to resist the attacks of the formless array. his divine soul was many times stronger than it was 5 years ago. The celestial star meditation diagram was indeed amazing. It was by relying on this cultivation method that Zhuowen's soul could improve so quickly. 5 years ago, there were only a little over 300 divine soul galaxies in his divine soul space. But now, his divine soul had reached an extremely terrifying level, and the number of divine soul galaxies had reached about 1,000. 1,000 divine soul galaxies? This was an extremely terrifying number. It was no exaggeration to say that the strength of Zhuowen's divine soul at this moment was comparable to the level of old monsters in the Void Heaven 8 steps. As for the Void Heaven 9 steps, Yuan had never seen it before, so he did not know how strong the divine soul of a terrifying powerhouse like the Void Heaven 9 steps was. However, Zhuan estimated that the Void Heaven 9 steps had already comprehended life and death. It was a realm that many old monsters in the Void Heaven 8 steps dreamt of but could not reach. From this, it could be seen that the Void Heaven 9 steps was definitely many times stronger than the Void Heaven 8 steps, or even a realm on another level. Zhuan guessed that if his divine soul galaxy could reach about 10,000, it might be comparable to the Void Heaven 9 steps. Of course, all of this was just a guess. Back then, Tai Ching, Yu Qing, and Sakyamuni were all Void Heaven 9 steps experts, or even stronger. However, Yun had never seen such an existence fight before, so he could only guess. In any case, the strength of Zhuowen's spirit was absolutely beyond imagination. This was absolutely true. Whoosh, whoosh. The sound of something breaking through the air could be heard as a terrifying attack suddenly appeared around Yun. These attacks were ever-changing. Saber formations, fire, flood, arrow rain, and so on. As long as it was a natural disaster or man-made disaster, it was basically within the scope of these changes. This was the attack of the formless formation. With a wave of his sleeve, Zhuowen's terrifying divine sense transformed into a whirlpool, and the incoming attacks were all reduced to nothingness. Although the attacks of the formless great array were as terrifying as ever, Yun was no longer the same as before. These attacks no longer had any effect on him. Zhuan stood up and looked behind him. This formless great array was extremely peculiar. Ever since he had completely destroyed that flaw, this formless great array had not revealed any more flaws. Yao Xiong and the other two were now outside the door. No matter how many methods they used, they could not enter the formless great array. When Zhuan first destroyed the flaw, it was actually a sudden idea. Of course, it was closely related to the remaining half of the map he had. In the map, there were only a few words describing the characteristics of the formless great array. At that time, Zhuan had wanted to give it a try, but he did not expect to get it right. Zhuan hesitated for a moment, but he did not return. Instead, he looked in front of the formless great array. He knew that as long as he could pass through the formless great array, he should be able to enter the core area of the Luo God Palace ruins. The restrictions in the first two areas of the Luo God Palace ruins should have been broken by Yao Xiong and the others. The good things inside should have been taken by Yao Xiong and the King Spirit. Only the core area was left untouched by Yao Xiong and the King Spirit. Although Yao Xiong knew the characteristics of the formless great array, he did not dare take the risk. After all, the formless great array was too scary. If he was not careful, the chances of him dying were too high. If Zhuan did not have the heavenly star essence, he would have died 1,000 times in the formless great array. He would not have been able to use the formless great array to refine his soul. I have to get the sun and moon grass. Yao Xiong and the King Spirit want to enter the core area of the Luo God Palace ruins. There must be something good inside. I wonder what else is there? Zhuowen's eyes flashed as he walked in front of the formless great array. As he went deeper, Yun found that the power of the formless great array was increasing. However, it still didn't have much of an effect on Zhuowen's powerful soul. Instead, Zhuowen relied on the formless grand array to continuously temper his soul, causing it to become more and more powerful. In the formless great array, Yun walked for 10 days and 10 nights. In the end, Yun stopped at the edge of the formless great array. At the edge of the formless great array, there was a 7-colored fog. The 7-colored fog was the same one Zhuowen had seen outside the door. The seven-colored fog seemed to cover the entire core area, making it impossible for the outside world to see what was inside. Zhuan knew that as long as he entered the other side of the seven-colored fog, he would be able to enter the core area. When Zhuan was about to step into the seven-colored fog, he vaguely heard a dreamlike chanting coming from the other side of the seven-colored fog. Zhuan frowned slightly. When he wanted to listen carefully, he found that although the voice was echoing in his ears, he couldn't hear what it was saying. This aroused Zhuan's curiosity. Peng. The moment Zhuan stepped into the seven-colored fog, a force suddenly acted on his right foot, and then Zhuan flew out. Zhuan twisted his waist and forcefully flipped in the air, landing on the ground and looking ahead gloomily. Zhuan's eyes showed fear. At the edge of the seven-colored fog, a skinny figure slowly walked over. This figure was a young man. His whole body was as thin as firewood, and his hair was all gone. Moreover, this person's skin was transparent. Zhuan could even clearly see the dense blood vessels under this person's skin. Martyr? Zhuan hurriedly took a few steps back, staring at the strange thin young man walking slowly in front of him with fear. After a moment of careful observation, Zhuan found that the thin young man in front of him was somewhat different from the martyr. The martyr he encountered in the gorge had a nearly transparent lower body, but the upper body was no different from an ordinary person. Moreover, his eyes were confused and lifeless, like the living dead. But the thin young man in front of him was completely transparent. Moreover, Zhuan found that the thin young man's eyes were clear and there was no confusion at all. Instead, he was firm. Martyr? Don't equate me with those weak-willed people in the suffering gorge. Those guys are called martyrs, and I am a defiant. The young man who called himself a defiant spoke for the first time, and it instantly shocked Zhuan. Zhuan looked up and down at the thin young man again. Besides, the appearance of the latter was similar to the martyr, his temperament and eyes were completely different from the martyr in the gorge. Your divine soul is very special. It actually formed its own galaxy. Moreover, you have so much heavenly domain starry essence. No wonder you could survive in the phaseless formation. You're amazing, the young man said lightly. Zhuan frowned slightly, but he was extremely vigilant in his heart. This young man could see through the heavenly domain starry essence in his body. You don't have to be nervous. Maybe you're wondering why I know you have so much heavenly domain starry essence, right? I didn't see through it. It was my Lord who saw through it. My appearance here is my Lord's idea. The corners of the young man's mouth rose slightly, and there was no hostility in his eyes. Chapter 2089. Eerie, come with me. Isn't the purpose of your trip to the Luo God Palace ruins to look for treasures? The real Luo God Palace is inside the rainbow fog. You can find anything you want. The young man smiled slightly, staring at Zhuan with a kind gaze as he slowly spoke. Zhuan frowned. He looked at the young man for a long time and finally decided to go in. The sun and moon grass might be inside the Luo God Palace. It was the only divine item that could balance the yin and yang in Mu Qinshue's soul. As long as Mu Qinshue's soul was balanced, Zhuan could use the heavenly starry sky essence to awaken Mu Qinshu. Therefore, Zhuan would not let go of the opportunity to get the sun and moon grass. Even if the Luo God Palace was dangerous, Zhuan would not back down. Let's go, Zhuan said calmly. The young man smiled and immediately entered the seven-colored fog in front of him. Zhuan mused for a moment before following the young man into the seven-colored fog. Outside the door, Yao Xiong and Di Ling looked gloomy. They had waited here for 5 years, but the formless array had not shown any flaws. This made the two of them, who were originally very anxious, feel even more anxious in their hearts. It's here. The formless array's flaw has appeared again. Lady Ghost Curse, who was studying the formless array, suddenly shouted in surprise. Yao Xiong and Di Ling rushed forward and said to Lady Ghost Curse, "Quickly find the flaw and open the passage." Lady Ghost Curse nodded. She made a series of hand seals with both hands, and her 5 fingers quickly formed hand seals. The black fog spewed out and covered the surface of the door again. Then, the black fog gathered below the door. Lady Ghost Curse made another gesture and the black fog gathered below the door, forming a black vortex. Lady Ghost Curse, you go in first. Lady Ghost Curse smiled and looked at Yao Xiong. She wanted to take credit, but when she heard Yao Xiong's indifferent words, her heart sank. Brother Yao, this is a formless formation. With my current cultivation, I'm afraid I won't be able to return. Lady Ghost Curse said, trembling. Yao Xiong stared coldly at the Ghost Curse lady, causing her hair to stand on end and her back to break out in cold sweat. The King Spirit's eyes were cold. A murderous divine sense enveloped the Ghost Curse lady like a dark cloud. The Lady of Curses was trembling and her face was pale. She quickly lowered her head and said, I'll go. Lady Ghost Curse entered the vortex under the watchful eyes of Yao Xiong and the King Spirit. This time, Yao Xiong and the King Spirit were much more cautious. If the Ghost Curse lady tried to destroy the vortex, they would kill her immediately. The Ghost Curse lady also thought of this joke, so she didn't destroy the entrance like Jun. Instead, she obediently entered the whirlpool. After Ghost Curse lady entered the entrance, Yao Xiong and the King Spirit looked at each other and followed. As soon as Yao Xiong and the King Spirit entered, they were attacked by the formless formation. They couldn't help but cover their foreheads and use their divine senses to resist the attack. In front of them, the Ghost Curse lady's face was pale. Her hands were constantly forming seals, and she was struggling to move forward. After about 10 steps, the Ghost Curse lady clutched her head and fell to the ground. Her vitality disappeared in an instant. Obviously, the Ghost Curse lady couldn't resist the formless formation's divine sense attack. Her vitality was completely gone. Yao Xiong and the King Spirit looked at each other with fear. This formless formation is really powerful. Although the Ghost Curse lady's cultivation is weak, her divine sense is comparable to the Void Sky 5th step. She couldn't withstand it for long. Yao Xiong's eyes flashed. The King Spirit said, Brother Yao, I know you are prepared. In this situation, you can't hide anything. Yao Xiong smiled and said, Of course not. After passing through the formless formation, the core area of the Luo God Palace is the key. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have been able to enter. Then, Yao Xiong took out 2 palm-sized pieces of green wood from his spirit ring and handed them to the King Spirit. This is the Soul Guard wood. It is mainly used to strengthen the divine sense. You can use it to strengthen the defense of your divine sense. The King Spirit took the Soul Guard wood, and his eyes lit up. The moment he touched the Soul Guard wood, he felt that his divine sense had been strengthened a lot. Brother Yao, you have a lot of good things on you. You even have something like the Soul Guard wood that can strengthen the divine sense? The King Spirit said meaningfully. Yao Xiong smiled and said, I was just lucky. I got this Soul Guard wood by accident. It's not particularly precious. Speaking of which, the formless formation is so scary. Even if you and I have the Soul Guard wood, we might not be able to pass through it. 5 years ago, Huan died here, just like the Ghost Curse lady, right? The King Spirit nodded and said, although Zhuowen's divine sense was strong, he couldn't have lasted too long in the formless formation. It's good that he died. After all, if a cultivator with a strong divine sense dies in the formless formation, it will weaken the power of the formation. After all, he did contribute a little bit to us. Yao Xiong nodded in agreement and said regretfully, there are not many suitable cultivators that can be summoned this time. Most of the cultivators I know have died in the formless formation. Fortunately, Duan and the Ghost Curse lady's divine sense are quite strong. It's a pity that Luo Chua was taken away by the martyrs. If he hadn't been taken away by the martyrs, he could have been useful in the formless formation. The King Spirit sneered and said, Luo Chua's divine sense is not strong. He mainly has a strong physical body. Didn't you call him here to safely pass through the canyon? If no new martyrs appear, the 4 of us won't be able to pass through the canyon. Yao Xiong didn't realize that he had been seen through. He just smiled calmly and said, Brother D, didn't we do this the last few times? Now that the formless formation has weakened a lot, at least with the Soul Guard wood, it won't affect our lives. The King Spirit nodded and said solemnly, I heard that there are not only martyrs in the Luotian palace, but also defiants. If you encounter them, you have to be careful. They are even more terrifying than the martyrs. Hearing the king's spirit mention the defiants, Yao Xiong's eyes became serious. He took a deep breath and said, "The defiants are indeed a big problem. They are much stronger than the martyrs and have high intelligence. They are better at lying and illusions. However, I still have a way to deal with the Dao defiants if we encounter them. Fortunately, I heard that there are only a few Dao defiants in the Luotian palace, so we might not encounter any of them once we enter." The king's spirit nodded, and the two of them slowly walked into the depths of the formless formation. After entering the seven-colored fog, Yun felt a white light shining on him. It was extremely dazzling. He narrowed his eyes, then opened them again. When he saw his surroundings clearly, he was completely stunned. What appeared before his eyes was a gigantic stone statue of the god of Luo. Around the Luotian stone statue, there were many white jade palaces. The seven-colored fog was like a carpet that dragged on the ground and spread out. It was like a paradise on earth. Jun originally thought that the core area of the Luotian palace would be the same as the outside world. It would be a ruin. Now, he realized that he was wrong. Not only was it not a ruin, but every palace was beautiful and full of life. At the very front, there was an incomparably huge palace. In front of this palace, there was a huge square stone tablet. The words, "Luotian Palace," were written on the tablet. The words were written in bold and powerful strokes. Jun looked at the young man leading the way and said, "Didn't the outside world say that the Luotian Palace was a ruin a long time ago? Why is the Luotian Palace here so intact?" The young man stopped, turned around, and said with a smile, "You might not know, right? When the Luotian Palace was first built, it was indeed a ruin. However, over the years, with the presence of the Lord, it has been gradually restored." "Isn't it normal for it to be on such a scale?" Zhuan frowned and asked, "Who is the Lord you are talking about?" The young man's smile grew wider. He looked up at the Luotian stone statue in the middle and pointed at it with his right hand. "Of course, it's the Lord Luotian." "Lord Luotian?" Didn't they say that Lord Luotian was killed by Great Brahma? The Luotian palace ruins were also exchanged with Lord Luotian's life. Could the outside world be false? Zhuan asked. The young man sneered. "It's just a rumor. How can you believe it so easily? After such a long time, many old fellows have fallen. A new generation has replaced the old. The truth of the past has long been sealed. Who can say for sure? Now, you want to bring me to see the Luotian of the past?" Zhuan asked. The young man's sneer disappeared and was replaced with a kind smile. "Yes, the Lord Luotian wants to see you. As for what it is, you don't have to ask me. I don't know either." With that, the young man continued to lead the way. After entering the Luotian palace, Zhuan realized that it was very quiet. Inside, there were white jade pillars that were so thick that it would take several people to wrap their arms around them. Beneath their feet, there was a seven-colored fog that exuded an aura of immortality. In the depths of the Luotian palace, there was a staircase that was several feet tall. The staircase led up to a tall and majestic circular platform. On the circular platform stood a woman in a white robe with long purple hair. The woman's back was facing Zhuan and the young man. Her figure was graceful and graceful. One look and one could tell that this woman was definitely an extraordinary beauty. "My lord, I have brought the person you named." The young man knelt on the ground and said respectfully, "Named? I don't think I have ever told this Dao Defiant my name. This Luotian is so powerful that she can predict my name and even know that I have the heavenly domain starry sky essence?" Chapter 2090. Illusions. The tall woman on the circular platform turned around slowly and revealed her peerlessly beautiful appearance. She had a pair of beautiful violet eyes that were like dazzling stars in the night sky, and it caused others to be charmed by her. "You're the founder of Luotian Palace 1,000,000 years ago?" Zhuan didn't kneel down. He raised his head slightly and gazed indifferently at the beautiful woman. The violet-haired woman smiled. "What? Are you surprised?" Are there rumors in the outside world that I, Luotian, have fallen? Zhuan nodded. Indeed. There are rumors in the outside world that you perished 1,000,000 years ago, and Luotian Palace has been reduced to ruins. Countless disciples have perished. So much time has passed that it's become a legend. Rumors can be true, but they can also be false. The violet-haired woman didn't explain anything and just spoke indifferently. Zhuan's eyes flickered, and he said in a low voice, I heard from this Tao Defiant that you're looking for me. Is there something you need? The violet-haired woman stared deeply at Zhuan with her beautiful violet eyes, and then the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. What's your objective in coming here? Zhuan frowned slightly. This has nothing to do with you, right? The violet-haired woman smiled and didn't get angry. She just placed her hand lightly on the high platform at the center of the platform and withdrew a divine herb. The divine herb was shaped like a stalk of grass. It was 30 centimeters long and only had 2 leaves. One of the leaves revealed moonlight while the other revealed sunlight. The images of the sun and moon floated above the divine herb, and it formed a magnificent scene where the sun and moon shone upon each other. Zhuan's entire body trembled. He stared fixedly at the divine herb that revealed the sun and moon, and he was stunned. He couldn't help but mutter softly, sun and moon grass. It really is sun and moon grass. The corners of the violet-haired woman's mouth curled up slightly when she saw Zhuan's reaction, and she smiled. It really is sun and moon grass. I presume you're even more aware of how precious it is than I am, right? As she spoke, the purple-haired woman waved her jade-like hand. The sun and moon grass, which had manifested the illusory image of the sun and moon, floated in front of Zhuan. Yun gently held the sun and moon grass in his hand. His body trembled, and his eyes were filled with excitement. He had finally found the sun and moon grass that he had been dreaming of, and Mu Chenxue could finally be saved. Looking at the sun and moon grass in his hand, Zhuan couldn't help but think of the beautiful figure that he yearned for day and night. He thought of all the things that happened between him and Mu Chenxue. They met in the ancient cavern, got to know each other at Fine God Academy, parted at the Burning Heaven sect, and finally got married with the heavens and earth as a witness. Mu Chenxue also fell into a deep sleep on the second day of their wedding. Back then, he had sworn that he would wake Mu Chenxue up and give her the happiness she deserved. Now, his vow was about to be fulfilled. Chenxue. Zhuan muttered in a low voice. The corners of the purple-haired woman's mouth curled up into a strange smile. She exchanged glances with the young man and continued, Do you need anything else? The Luotian Palace has deep resources and reserves, so I can give you anything you want. Zhuan took a deep breath and calmed the excitement in his heart. After that, he looked at the purple-haired woman and said in a deep voice, The sun and moon grass was my objective for coming to the cloudy, clear and round void palace. I've already obtained what I want, so I don't need anything else. However, I know that there's no such thing as a free lunch in this world. You're definitely not giving the sun and moon grass to me for free, right? Even though Zhuan was unable to restrain his excitement, he hadn't lost his reason. The purple-haired woman smiled and said, You're right. You can choose anything you want from the Luotian Palace, but I need something from you, and it's the heavenly domain's starry essence. Zhuan's eyes narrowed slightly, but he wasn't surprised. Earlier, when the Tao Defiant had found him and pointed out the heavenly domain's starry essence in his possession, Yun had already guessed it. When she saw Zhuan fall silent, the purple-haired woman smiled and said, I don't need much. I just want half of the heavenly domain's starry essence in your possession. I think the sun and moon grass is more precious to you than others, so it wouldn't be too much to take out half of the heavenly domain's starry essence in your possession, right? Zhuan's gaze suddenly became extremely sharp, but his heart gradually turned cold. Zhuan had dozens of barrels of heavenly domain's starry essence in his possession, and they were large barrels that were half the height of a person. His reserves could be said to be extremely abundant. Zhuan originally thought that the purple-haired woman only wanted a few drops of heavenly domain's starry essence, but he never expected that she would want half of it. Could it be that this purple-haired woman really possesses the ability to read the mind and knows the exact amount of heavenly domain starry essence in Zhuowen's possession? Zhuowen felt that it was slightly strange. Earlier, the young man had specifically asked for him, Zhuowen, to come here. Now, the purple-haired woman had even asked for half of the heavenly domain starry essence in his possession and not the exact amount. All of this was slightly strange. What? You're unwilling. If you think it's a loss, then I can give you anything in the Luotian Palace in exchange. How about it until you're satisfied? The purple-haired woman spoke unhurriedly. Zhuowen flicked his sleeve and said, How could I? The sun and moon grass is too important to me, and it isn't inferior to my life. It's related to the life and death of my wife, so how can mere heavenly domain starry essence compare to it? As he spoke, Zhuowen flicked his sleeve and withdrew over 10 barrels of heavenly domain starry essence before placing them in front of him. The eyes of the Tao Defiant glowed, and he revealed a wisp of a strange expression. The purple-haired woman was much calmer, but wild joy was still impossible to conceal in the depths of her eyes. How satisfying! The purple-haired woman smiled sweetly and signaled to the Tao Defiant with her eyes, and then the latter walked over to Zhuowen with a grin on his face. Brother Zhuo, you're really generous. We'll kindly accept these heavenly domain starry essences. As he spoke, the Tao Defiant stretched out his right hand and touched the pile of heavenly domain starry essences before him. However, the Tao Defiant's expression changed drastically when his right hand just happened to touch the heavenly domain starry essences. An invisible ripple surged over like a tide and enveloped the Tao Defiant. Formation discs? The Tao Defiant couldn't help but take a few steps back, and his gaze descended towards the bottom of the barrels of heavenly domain starry essence. There was a formation disc beneath every single barrel, and they were placed in a disorderly manner in a strange pattern. The Tao Defiant spoke with a gloomy gaze. What's the meaning of this? The eyes of the purple-haired woman who stood on the platform suddenly erupted with terrifying killing intent. After that, an aura that was even more terrifying than the explosion of a galaxy shot out explosively from within her, and it filled the entire Luotian Palace. This aura was too terrifying. The entire Luotian Palace actually trembled violently while countless rocks fell from above, and it seemed like it would collapse at any moment. Zhuowen's expression changed slightly. This aura is too terrifying, and it's much more terrifying than Yu Wuxi's. Could it be that this purple-haired woman is really the legendary Luotian who ascended 9 times in the void? What are you waiting for? Quickly undo the formation. Otherwise, you'll die a graveless death if Lord Luotian gets angry. The Tao Defiant spoke hurriedly while a wisp of terror appeared on his face. It seemed like he was really afraid of the purple-haired woman. Zhuowen's gaze flickered, but he didn't do as the Tao Defiant said and undo the formation. Instead, he strode up the stairs and flashed towards the purple-haired woman. Do you want to die? The Tao Defiant suddenly shouted loudly. As soon as he flashed up the stairs, Zhuowen felt an extremely terrifying pressure crush down upon him. This pressure was too terrifying. Zhuowen felt like his flesh, blood, and bones were being crushed into pieces and powder. It was like the pressure would crush him completely if he took another step forward. The purple-haired woman looked down coldly at Zhuowen and said indifferently, Do you really want to die that badly? However, you're not bad since you were able to endure the pressure of my 9 times in the void. However, I won't hold back if you take another step forward. Zhuowen cracked a smile, and then the purple-haired woman watched as he suddenly strode up another flight of stairs, and then he walked up slowly. The purple-haired woman's eyes narrowed, and she continued, Looks like you really are courting death. Quickly leave, otherwise, you really won't be able to keep your life. Zhuowen heaved a sigh of relief instead, and then he roared with laughter, You want me to leave? All of you really put on a good show. Tao Defiant, you were full of lies from the very beginning. What Lord Luotian? What Sun Moon Herb? Zhuowen turned around slowly and gazed at the Tao Defiant who had an unsightly expression on his face. He continued, All of that isn't true, right? Besides that, Luotian is probably just an empty shell. The lies you created are actually filled with loopholes. As he spoke, Yuan suddenly leaped up and descended onto the round platform. At this moment, the purple-haired woman's beautiful eyes revealed terror, and she couldn't help but take a few steps back. "Fuck off." Yuan withdrew brilliant violet and slashed diagonally. The glow of the sword was like water, and it transformed into countless strands of violet light that converged into the purple-haired woman's body. The strands of light passed through the purple-haired woman's body, yet they didn't cause any harm to her. However, a deep arc arose on the corners of Yuan's mouth. He knew that the purple-haired woman was simply an illusion and not a physical body. Furthermore, the terrifying pressure that the purple-haired woman was emitting was most likely an illusion. Yuan lowered his head to look at the sun-moon herb in his hand. He was able to clearly sense that the sun-moon herb was real, and if he didn't have any doubts, he would absolutely not think that it was fake. At the same time, Yuan was even more shocked in his heart. Isn't this illusion a little too formidable? I actually didn't notice that everything here was fake in the beginning. Moreover, all of this was created and directed by the Tao Defiant, who was trapped within the confinement slaughter formation. The Tao Defiant's objective was the heavenly domain Starsky essence in Zhuowen's possession. However, Yuan was puzzled. How exactly did the Tao Defiant know that Yuan possessed the heavenly domain Starsky essence? Moreover, how did the Tao Defiant know Zhuowen's name and some other information about him? Yuan flashed onto the round platform, and then he stopped holding back and swiftly swept out with his powerful divine sense. Moreover, he even circulated the shapeless world and stellar meditation diagram. Chapter 2091. Encounter. As he glanced at the surroundings, Yuan noticed that the grand and enormous Luotian palace was nowhere to be seen. Even the orderly and vast buildings around it had vanished. What appeared in front of Yuan was a wasteland, and the so-called circular platform was nothing more than a piece of broken rock. What a powerful illusion! Yuan crushed the ordinary herb in his hand while he stared coldly at the Tao Defiant, who was trapped within the formation. He knew that everything he saw just now was an illusion, and it was an illusion created by the Tao Defiant. Zhuowen's soul was sufficiently strong, so he wasn't able to discern that it was an illusion at all. Everything was so real. If the Tao Defiant and the so-called Luotian hadn't spoken with some loopholes, then Zhuowen really might have fallen for it. The Tao Defiant asked calmly, "How did you see through it?" Zhuowen laughed coldly, "The illusion you executed was very real, and I wasn't able to see through it at all. However, the conversation between you and the Luotian you've transformed into was filled with loopholes. I think you've been here for too long, and you've forgotten the ways of the world, right?" The Tao Defiant nodded while a slightly dazed expression appeared in his eyes, and he spoke in a low voice, "I'd intended to treat you well and allow you to gradually die amidst a beautiful lie. Unfortunately, you're too uncooperative. Since it's like that, rumble, rumble." He hadn't even finished speaking when the Tao Defiant suddenly straightened his figure, and then a terrifying aura shot out explosively from him. After that, the sound of explosions resounded incessantly from the formation. Zhuowen's pupils constricted slightly. He stared at the Tao Defiant, who was in a berserk state within the formation, and he was visibly moved. This Tao Defiant really isn't simple. He was actually able to erupt with such a terrifying aura. Of course, he was aware that the Tao Defiant was skilled in illusions, and his aura was probably enhanced by illusions. However, he'd witnessed how terrifying the martyrs were, and this Tao Defiant was clearly of a higher level than the martyrs. So, Yuan truly didn't dare to go head-on against him. Yuan glanced at the surroundings, and then his gaze instantly descended towards the end of the area behind him. There was a building that occupied an extremely large area yet was already in ruins. This should be the Luotian Palace ruins. Let's go in and take a look. Yuan had a map of the ruins, so he knew that the huge ruins were the real Luotian Palace ruins. With a stomp of his right foot, he unfurled his torch dragon wings and flew toward the ruins. The Tao Defiant noticed Zhuowen's actions as well, and his expression changed slightly. He suddenly tore at his chest with his right hand and instantly tore off a large piece of flesh. Of course, the Tao Defiant's flesh and blood were translucent, and the only thing that possessed color was the dense blood vessels on his body. These blood vessels were torn off by him, causing blood to spray into the surroundings. It was an extremely bloody scene. Blood dragon entanglement. The Tao Defiant roared furiously. The rays of blood-red light that he'd torn down were like worms that coiled around each other and transformed into an enormous blood dragon that shook the heavens and the earth. Brr! The blood dragon roared at the sky. It swung its huge tail and chased after Zhuowen with its huge dragon body at an extremely fast speed. The Tao Defiant's blood threads were extremely strange and had extremely strong penetrating power. They could actually ignore the confinement-killing array and flashed out, catching up to Zhuowen in an instant. Zhuowen immediately drew out 48 beginning demonic golden swords. They quickly drew complicated patterns in the air and blasted towards the blood dragon. Bang! What made Zhuowen's expression turn ugly was that the blood dragon was extremely powerful. With a swing of its tail, it dispersed the killing intent vortex formed by the beginning demonic golden swords. Under the command of Zhuowen's powerful consciousness, the scattered beginning demonic golden swords gathered around Zhuowen and formed an impenetrable defense. Zhuowen held the glorious amethyst galaxy sword in his right hand, while dense purple intent condensed into another purple sword in his left hand. He immediately used his 7th level Tao intent. Zhuowen drew both swords and began to use the Tao of Destruction sword technique. Terrifying and powerful sword lights poured out like flowing water. From the first move, sword piercing thistles, to the 7th move, sword swimming through the void. Under the boost of his 7th level Tao intent, the might of these 7 moves had increased by an entire 7 times. Bang, bang, bang. All 7 moves descended onto the blood dragon. At this moment, the blood dragon that was originally all-powerful had stopped moving, and the scarlet-red glow on its surface had become much dimmer instead. Sword dragon slashes the heavens. At the instant the blood dragon dimmed down, Zhuowen seized the opportunity to pursue the blood dragon. He suddenly slashed with the violet swords in his hands, and terrifying violet sword chi sprayed out and condensed into 2 enormous violet dragons that shook the heavens and the earth in the end. The 2 enormous violet dragons suddenly sandwiched the blood dragon between them, and then they opened their terrifying mouths furiously and forcefully tore the blood dragon into 2. Sword Dragon Slashes the Heavens was the 8th move amongst the 9 moves of the Tao of Destruction sword technique, and its might was much stronger than the 7th move, Sword Swimming Through the Void. Moreover, it was executed with both swords and was enhanced by his 7th level Tao intent. The might of Sword Dragon Slashes the Heavens was so strong that it absolutely shocked the heavens and the earth. Even the blood dragon formed by the Tao Defiant was easily annihilated by it. After annihilating the blood dragon, the torch dragon wings on Zhuowen's back suddenly flapped, and he left behind a few afterimages on the spot as he entered the Luo God Palace ruins. That bastard! I absolutely can't let him find the blood of the heavenly Tao. Once he finds it, the Luo God Palace will cease to exist, and I, the Tao Defiant and Martyr, will vanish into thin air. The Tao Defiant gnashed his teeth as he suddenly smashed his right fist against the confinement-killing formation. The dense blood vessels on his fist exploded, and then his fist erupted with terrifying energy. Rumble! In an instant, the confinement-killing formation collapsed inch by inch like an arrow at the end of its flight, and the Tao Defiant transformed into a whirlwind that surged towards the Luo God Palace ruins behind him. That's the Tao Defiant? The Tao Defiant wants to enter the Luo God Palace ruins. Could it be that he's discovered us and wants to hide the blood of the heavenly Tao? At that moment, Yao Xiong and the King's Spirit walked out of the phaseless formation. They immediately saw the Tao Defiant breaking through the confinement-killing formation and charging towards the Luo God Palace ruins like a wild beast. Brother Yao, what do you mean? Does the Tao Defiant know where the blood of the heavenly Tao is hidden? The King's Spirit asked in surprise. Now isn't the time to dwell on this. We absolutely can't let the Tao Defiant enter the Luo God Palace ruins. Brother D, hurry up and stop that Tao Defiant. Once that Tao Defiant enters the Luotian Palace ruins, that fellow will become unkillable and unkillable. As Yao Xiong spoke, he took out a metal box that was a few feet long from his spirit ring. At the same time, he took out a talisman and stuck it on the surface of the metal box before tossing it out. The runes on the surface of the talisman instantly lit up, and then strands of irregular light spread out and covered the entire metal box. When the light covered the entire metal box, it disappeared into thin air. When the metal box reappeared, it was already above the Tao Defiant's head. The Tao Defiant noticed the iron box above him as well, and he frowned. He was just about to casually blast the iron box away when it suddenly exploded apart, and a dense expanse of iron chains emerged from within it. Every single iron chain was filled with dazzling light. The iron chains were like spirited snakes that coiled around the Tao Defiant, and then they suddenly constricted and restrained the Tao Defiant. The Tao Defiant was caught off guard, and his body that was in midair fell to the ground in a sorry state. "You two bastards!" The Tao Defiant roared angrily, and then the blood vessels in his body exploded without any regard for his life. The chains around him shattered one after another. The moment the Tao Defiant blasted open the chains, the King's Spirit and Yao Xiong rushed over. The two of them didn't say anything and immediately used their divine abilities and divine artifacts to attack the Tao Defiant without holding back. The two of them knew that the Tao Defiant was skilled in illusions, so before the Tao Defiant could use his illusions, they had to attack with lightning speed so that the Tao Defiant wouldn't have time to use his illusions. Sure enough, the Tao Defiant was exhausted and barely able to deal with their attacks. Especially Yao Xiong, he withdrew an enormous axe that was covered in complicated talisman markings from his spirit ring. The axe was extremely effective against the Tao Defiant, and it terrified the Tao Defiant to the point of not daring to go head-on against the axe and hurriedly dodging it. For a time, the Tao Defiant fell into a disadvantaged position, and he was desperately suppressed by Yao Xiong and Di Ling. Di Ling spoke with slight contempt. "Brother Yao, the Tao Defiant isn't as terrifying and formidable as you said. He's like a stray dog before our joint forces." Yao Xiong shook his head and said, "Brother Di, you haven't experienced the Tao Defiant's illusions. Once you fall into his illusions, it's equivalent to entering a world that he rules over, and it's very difficult for you to wake up from it. Once you fall into his illusions, your life and death will be completely under his control. If you don't wake up in time, then only a miserable death awaits you. We're comparatively lucky. For some unknown reason, the Tao Defiant's illusions seem to have been destroyed once, and he won't be able to execute powerful illusions again in a short period of time." Di Ling nodded. The Tao Defiant was completely suppressed by the two of them, so Di Ling was rather relaxed, and he asked Yao Xiong about the questions in his heart. Di Ling asked curiously, "Brother Yao, you said that we can't allow the Tao Defiant to enter the ruins of Luotian Palace. Is it because of the blood of the Heaven Tao hidden within the ruins?" Yao Xiong nodded and spoke solemnly. "The blood of the Heaven Tao was left behind by the founder of Luotian Palace, Luotian. It has always been a mystery where Luotian obtained the blood of the Heaven Tao. However, according to legend, the blood of the Heaven Tao is closely related to Luotian's ascension into the Void Realm. Actually, the Tao Defiants and the martyrs we encountered in the gorge became like that because of the blood of the Heaven Tao. The blood of the Heaven Tao gave birth to the Tao Defiants and martyrs. However, the Tao Defiants can be considered as successful products of the blood of the Heaven Tao, whereas the martyrs are failures. But regardless of whether it's the Tao Defiants or the martyrs, they'll become undying once they come within a 100 m of the blood of the Heaven Tao. Chapter 2092. Plot and counterattack. Upon hearing this, the King's Spirit's expression became extremely serious. He wasn't afraid of the immortal body, but he was extremely wary of the invulnerability that Yao Xiong had mentioned. Invulnerability, as the name suggested, meant that no spells or void sky godly power would be able to harm it. If all attacks were ineffective, then how were they supposed to fight? The opponent was practically invincible. "Brother Yao, you have foresight. If the Defiant had really entered the Luo God Palace ruins, it would have been very difficult for us to go in again," the King's Spirit said with a smile. Yao Xiong grinned, but he didn't answer. He withdrew a ghastly white string and tied the Tao Defiant up with his hands behind his back. "This is the soul bind rope. It's a rope that binds the soul by binding the body. The Tao Defiance illusions are mainly executed through the soul. Now that the soul has been bound, the illusions are naturally unable to be used, said Yao Xiong. The Defiant's eyes were extremely cold, but he was still smiling coldly. There was a hint of mockery in his smile. The king's spirit wasn't happy to see this. He kicked the Defiant and said, "You're already a fish on the chopping block. Why are you still so stubborn?" The Defiant didn't feel any pain. It was just that he was forced to bow. He said coldly, "You two are so stupid that it's pitiful. Before you, someone else had already entered the Luo God Palace ruins." The king's spirit laughed coldly and said, "That's a cheap lie. Do you really think we'll believe it? Only the two of us have entered the Luo God Palace ruins. The others are already dead." Yao Xiong felt that something was wrong. He quickly asked, "Who is it?" The Defiant grinned and said, "I only know that guy's name is Jun. He's already inside the Luo God Palace looking for the blood of heaven." "Ha! Zhuan isn't dead?" Yao Xiong and the king's spirit suddenly raised their heads and looked at each other in disbelief. They had personally experienced how terrifying the phaseless formation was. If it weren't for the soul guard wood, the chances of them dying in the phaseless formation were very high. But Zhuan didn't have a treasure like the soul guard wood. How had he come out alive? "Are you lying to us?" the king's spirit asked angrily. The Defiant didn't panic. He smiled and said, "Lying to you? Is that necessary? If I didn't go after Zhuan, would I be stopped by the two of you?" Then, the Defiant looked at Yao Xiong. Although the king's spirit, the Defiant's intuition told him that Yao Xiong was harder to deal with. Moreover, the Defiant, and the Defiant spirit. Yao Xiong frowned and stopped the king's spirit from attacking. "Let's go in and have a look." The king's spirit's eyes flickered. He pointed at the Defiant and said, "What about the Defiant? The soul-binding rope isn't that easy to break free from. Once it binds you, your entire soul will be imprisoned. It's almost impossible to break free. Let's not bother about him for now. Let's enter the Luo God Palace first." Yao Xiong's voice was slightly anxious. Obviously, he was worried that Yun would find the blood of the heavenly Tao before him. The king's spirit nodded, and then the two of them entered the Luo God Palace. Not long after they left, the Defiant's eyes glowed red. He sneered and said, "The blood of the heavenly Tao? Do you really think it's that easy to get?" Thump, thump. Blurry figures appeared in the seven-colored fog around the ruins. These figures were like puppets, and they dragged their numb bodies as they walked slowly towards the Tao Defiance. At a glance, there were more than 20 of them. When these figures came closer, their true faces were finally revealed. Their eyes were lifeless, and their hair was gone. Their upper bodies were like ordinary people, but their lower bodies were transparent. Their blood vessels could be seen. These 20-odd figures were all the martyrs who had appeared in the canyon before. Luo Suo, who had become a martyr, was one of them. Luo Suo's hair was gone, and his lower body was transparent. He was like a walking corpse as he gathered with the other martyrs. When the martyrs gathered around the Tao Defiant was muttering softly and chanting with a strange rhythm. Then, the martyrs' hands formed claws, and at the tips of their fingers, transparent blades appeared. Then, the martyrs waved the blades in their hands rhythmically, cutting the soul-binding rope on the Defiant. The soul-binding rope was extraordinary. When it came into contact with the blades, countless sparks flew. However, no matter how extraordinary the soul-binding rope was, cracks had appeared on its surface after being cut repeatedly by so many blades. Moreover, the cracks grew larger and larger until the soul-binding rope shattered into countless pieces in the end. The Defiant stood up slowly, and then he grinned as he gazed at the martyrs who were standing respectfully around him. These three outsiders think they're smart. Do they really think the blood of the Heaven Tao is in the ruins of Luotian Palace? Ha! How foolish! Yao Xiong and the others had been under the surveillance of the martyrs since the moment they entered the canyon. Moreover, the martyrs were under the Defiant's control, so the Defiant was naturally aware of Yao Xiong and the others' whereabouts. It was even to the extent that Juan had been under the Defiant's surveillance after he entered the phaseless formation. It was at that time that the Defiant noticed the heavenly domain starry essence in Juan's possession, and he guessed that Juan definitely had quite a bit of it. Therefore, the Defiant had set up an illusion to make Juan obediently hand over the heavenly domain's starry essence. As long as Juan was willing to hand over half of the heavenly domain's starry essence, the Defiant would be able to force Juan to hand over the other half. Unfortunately, the Defiant had been shut out during the Battle of Illusions, and an accident had occurred. In the end, Juan had turned the tables on him. At that time, the Defiant knew that Yao Xiong and the King Spirit had arrived as well, so he had played along and deliberately made Yao Xiong and the King Spirit fight. The Defiant's original plan had been to let Yao Xiong and the King Spirit know that Juan had entered the ruins of Luotian Palace, but an accident had occurred. Yao Xiong had more treasures than he had expected, and Yao Xiong knew a lot about the ruins of Luotian Palace. Therefore, the Defiant had stumbled once again. Although the Defiant had stumbled twice, he had achieved his goal, which was to lure all the intruders into the ruins of Luotian Palace. Blood of the Heavenly Tao? Do you really think that such a divine item is something that mortals like you can touch? The Defiant sneered and walked to the stone statue in the center. He tapped the statue's foot a few times, and a secret door opened automatically at the statue's right foot. The Tao Defiant took a step into the secret door, and he was just about to close it when a strand of strange cold energy suddenly assaulted him. The Defiant's pupils constricted, and his movements instantly became extremely slow in the cold air. Then, the Defiant was shocked to discover that an ice lotus had been thrown at him like a hurricane. It was extremely fast. The cold air on the surface of the ice lotus was bone-chilling as it smashed into the secret door. Instantly, the secret door turned into a world of ice and snow, and the Defiant's body froze. He stood there without moving, and his entire body had turned into an ice sculpture. There were more than 20 martyrs in the open space in front of the stone statue. Their eyes were lifeless, and they were like walking corpses that didn't have their own thoughts. A figure that was completely covered in black mist swiftly passed through the martyrs. He didn't stop at all, nor did he meet their gazes. The martyrs were extremely slow, and they were much less threatening than the Defiant. However, if one met their gazes, then even if one possessed extraordinary strength, one might still be assimilated into a martyr. The black figure clearly knew the characteristics of the martyrs, so he avoided their gazes and instantly flashed into the secret door at the foot of the Luotian Palace's stone statue. The black mist slowly dispersed after the black figure entered the secret door, and a handsome face with a pair of cold eyes was revealed. Although the Defiant's entire body had been frozen by the ice lotus, he was only unable to move. His eyes were still moving about, and he was clearly still conscious. Especially when he saw the cold and indifferent face of the young man that was revealed after the black mist dispersed, the Defiant's expression became extremely unsightly. Didn't you enter the interior of Luotian Palace? The Defiant stuttered. Wasn't the young man before him the black-clothed Zhuan? After Zhuan realized that something was wrong with the Defiant, he'd made two preparations. At the instant he'd trapped the Defiant with the confinement slaughter formation, he'd transformed the black-clothed Zhuan into a speck of dust and concealed himself at the entrance to the ruins. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.